Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn as son of Gilgamesh in fate and fell in love with Artoria? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Golden Prince. The dream was always the same. It began with the scent of rain on dry earth and the taste of salt-laced broth, a flavor so vivid it felt more real than the waking world. Then came the images, fractured and fleeting. A flash of vibrant orange against a deep green forest, the towering red gate of a village nestled between mountains, the warmth of a hand on his shoulder, and the booming, infectious laughter of a man with wild white hair. He felt a phantom ache in his knuckles from a punch thrown too hard, the sting of a scraped knee, and an overwhelming, crushing loneliness. Hat was followed by an equally overwhelming sense of belonging. And always, at the end, he saw the fox. A colossal beast of incandescent orange energy, its 9 tails lashing against the inside of a cage forged from water and shadow. It did not snarl or rage. It simply lay there, its enormous, slitted eye regarding him with an ancient, weary intelligence that spoke of shared lifetimes and a bond deeper than blood. Narum's eyes snapped open. The crimson irises, a direct inheritance from his father, sharpened, dispelling the last vestiges of the dream world's azure sky. He was not in a forest. He lay on spun silk sheets in a room where the walls were panels of polished obsidian and the ceiling was a slow, swirling star chart of captured starlight. The air, filtered and charged with a hum of latent magical energy, carried the scent of ozone and lilies, not rain and ramen. He sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The morning light of Uruk streamed through the floor-to-ceiling crystalline window, casting long shadows across the minimalist chamber. His body, lean and corded with the muscle of a lifetime of relentless training, was a tapestry of faint, silvery scars. Sunlight caught the gold of his hair, a shade brighter and wilder than his father's, and for a moment, the 3 whisker-like marks on each of his cheeks, birthmarks no healer or magus could explain, seemed to deepen. He was Narum, son of Gilgamesh, prince of Uruk. That was his reality. And yet, the dreams of the other life, the life of Naruto Uzumaki, felt just as true. For 20 years, they had been whispers, fragments of emotion and sensation. But lately, they were becoming stories. Coherent, demanding. He pushed the feeling down, a familiar discipline. His father did not tolerate such introspection. Sentiment. Gilgamesh had once sneered, his voice like the grinding of gold on stone, is the rust that consumes the blade of kingship. Narum rose and walked to the window, his bare feet silent on the cool, dark floor. Below him, Uruk sprawled in all its impossible glory. It was not the mud brick ziggurat of history books. This was Uruk reborn, a city-state built upon the foundations of the old. A gleaming metropolis of glass towers and golden architecture that scraped the clouds. Suspended aqueducts, shimmering with magical currents, ferried pure water between buildings. Gardens bloomed on rooftops 1,000 feet in the air. It was a monument to one man's will, a kingdom carved out of the modern world and shielded from it by a boundary field so powerful it warped satellite imagery. Confounded the minds of any mundane who strayed too near. It was a perfect, golden cage. And its king, his father, had not been seen in public for over a decade. He ruled from the apex of the ziggurat, a silent, brooding presence whose power was felt in every pulse of the city's magical grid. Narum's gaze drifted to the central plaza, already bustling with citizens in flowing white and gold robes. Today was the feast of the new sun, a celebration of Uruk's enduring prosperity. It was one of the few times he was required to make a public appearance. A duty. He was the Golden Prince, the heir apparent, the symbol of the city's future. He had to be flawless, powerful, and above all, a reflection of the king. He turned from the window and the golden ripples began. They shimmered in the air around him, portals of pure light, each no larger than his hand. From one, a simple, dark tunic of woven fabric emerged. From another, a pair of tough, leather-soled boots. From a third, a pair of black bracers. The gate of Babylon, the treasury of the king, his birthright. While his father's gate held the prototypes of all human invention, Narum's was different. More personal. It held what he himself had placed within it. And sometimes, things he didn't remember acquiring. Simple, practical things. The tools of a warrior, not a king. Dressed, he strode out of his chambers. The royal guard, clad in immaculate golden armor, snapped to attention, their halberds thudding against the floor in unison. Their faces were hidden behind emotionless helms, but he could feel their reverence, their awe. He was his father's son. He was a demigod. To them, he was a walking miracle. He offered a curt nod, his expression a mask of detached neutrality he had perfected over years of practice. It was the face they expected to see. He walked the long, spiraling causeway down the ziggurat, the open air growing warmer as he descended. The distant sounds of music and laughter from the plaza grew louder, but Naram's focus was turned inward. The dream of the fox lingered. He could almost feel its vast, dormant power coiled in the pit of his stomach, a sea of energy separate from the mana that flowed through his magical circuits. Two distinct power sources, coexisting. Another inexplicable part of him. He felt a subtle shift in the air, a prickle on his skin. It wasn't a physical change, but a disturbance in the world's natural energy. A note played out of key in a flawless symphony. It was a sense he'd always had, an ability to feel the life force of the world around him, but it had grown sharper recently, more precise. He paused, scanning the horizon. The sky was a perfect, cloudless blue. The city's boundary field was stable. Nothing. He dismissed it as a phantom sensation and continued his descent. The Grand Plaza was a sea of jubilant humanity. Merchants offered sweet cakes and fruit nectar. Children chased each other with wooden toys, their laughter echoing off the polished stone. Upon the central dais, the city elders waited for him, their faces wreathed in smiles. Naram took his place on the gilded throne set out for him, the symbol of his father's authority. He looked out over the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the smiling faces, the families holding hands, the teenagers trying to look aloof but failing. For a moment, the mask slipped. He saw them not as subjects, but as people. Precious people. The thought came with a sudden, painful clarity, another echo from that other life. My precious people. The phrase resonated in his soul with the force of a vow. One of the elders, a man named Bel Shalti with a long, white beard, stepped forward to begin the rites. We gather today under the benevolent gaze of our great King Gilgamesh, and in the honored presence of our prince, Naram. To celebrate another year of Uruk's unending glory, the words washed over Naram, meaningless platitudes. His attention was elsewhere. That feeling was back, stronger now, a low thrumming vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It felt like the air itself was being stretched too thin. He subtly placed a hand on the arm of his throne, his senses spreading out, tasting the currents of mana. Searching for the source. Then he saw it. It wasn't something you saw with your eyes, not at first. It was a distortion, a heat haze shimmer in the air above the center of the plaza. A place where reality looked wrong. Wrinkled. Bel Shalti's speech faltered as a low, tearing sound filled the air, like 1,000 sheets of paper being ripped in half, amplified to a deafening roar. The crowd fell silent, their joyous faces turning to confusion, then fear. The shimmer intensified, darkening, coalescing into a jagged, vertical wound in the sky. It was blacker than any night, a void that seemed to drink the very light around it. The smell hit next, a putrid stench of ancient brine and decay that clawed at the back of the throat. Panic erupted. The screams of the crowd were a physical blow. From the black wound, something fell. It was not a creature of flesh and bone. It was a nightmare-given form, a vaguely humanoid thing of pale, chitinous material, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. It had no face, only a gaping maw filled with needle-like teeth. It moved with a horrifying, insectoid skittering, its shrieking cry a violation of sound. A Lamu. Before the royal guard could even react, it lunged into the crowd. The slaughter was immediate and sickeningly intimate. It tore through people with casual, horrifying force. Another Lamu dropped from the fissure, then 3 more. Then a dozen. They poured from the sky like a tide of filth, their screeches a chorus of pure malice. The royal guard formed a phalanx, their golden shields locking together. For Uruk, for the king, their captain roared, and they charged. Magical energy flared as their lances struck home, blasting one of the creatures apart in a shower of steaming ichor. But for every one they killed, 3 more swarmed them, their claws and teeth tearing through enchanted gold plate as if it were parchment. Civilians were scattering, tripping, being dragged down by the pale monstrosities. It was a massacre. Narum was on his feet, his mind a whirlwind. He saw a Lamu corner a mother and her two small children against a vendor's stall. The creature raised its bladed limb, its shriek of triumph piercing the chaos. And in that instant, everything clicked. The fragments of the dream, the whispers of a past life, the phantom aches and echoing emotions, they didn't just coalesce. They slammed into him with the force of a physical impact. 20 years of a second lifetime, a life of struggle, loss, and unyielding determination, flooded his consciousness. Naruto Uzumaki, the Leaf Village, Team 7, Jiraiya, the Akatsuki, Pain, the 4th grade ninja war, Kagaya, he felt it all, knew it all, as if he had just lived it a moment ago. The world sharpened, the two power sources within him, the mana of his divine heritage and the chakra of his soul's past, snapped into alignment. The world's natural energy wasn't just a feeling anymore, he could see it, a shimmering web of life connecting everything. He could feel the panic of the people, the malice of the Lamu, the life force of every blade of grass in the plaza. Sage mode. He didn't think, he acted. A golden ripple appeared beside his head. A simple, unadorned iron dagger shot from it, not with the lazy drift of his father's treasury, but with the explosive force of a railgun. It crossed the plaza in a blur, raying itself in the Lamu's head an instant before its claw descended. The creature froze, then collapsed into a heap. The mother stared, clutching her children, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Narum was already moving. He didn't teleport. He ran, a golden blur weaving through the panicked crowd. Another Lamu lunged at him. He didn't summon a sword. Instead, his right hand ignited with a swirling, churning sphere of pure golden mana. It looked like a miniature sun, humming with terrifying power. Rasengan. The name came unbidden to his lips, a word from another world. He slammed the sphere into the creature's chest. There was no grand explosion, only a grinding, implosive force. The Lamu was not thrown back. It was violently cored out, its torso twisted and obliterated into nothingness. He didn't pause to admire his work. The royal guard was about to be overrun. Fall back. Form a perimeter around the civilians. He roared, his voice cutting through the cacophony. It was not the command of a prince. It was the order of a seasoned commander, a cage. The guards, stunned but disciplined, obeyed instantly. As they retreated, Narum raised his hand. Behind him, the air filled with hundreds of golden ripples. But this wasn't the arrogant, chaotic storm of his father's treasury. This was organized, strategic. Volley 1, forward arc. From the gates, 100 spears launched in a precise, deadly wave. Not aimed at individual targets, but at the ground in front of the advancing Lamu horde. They slammed into the stone, creating a dense forest of razor-sharp steel that broke the creature's charge, impaling the front runners and forcing the rest into a bottleneck. Volley 2, aerial denial. A new set of gates opened high above. A shower of weighted nets and heavy, blunt-ended maces rained down. Not to kill, but to cripple and slow the tide. He was conducting an orchestra of death, each weapon a note in a perfectly composed symphony of battle. He used the gate of Babylon not as a treasury to be flaunted, but as an arsenal to be wielded with tactical brilliance. A hulking brute of a Lamu, twice the size of the others, broke through the spear wall, shrugging off the nets. It charged directly at a knot of guards protecting the cowering elders. Narum met its charge head-on. Golden chains, thicker and more ornate than any he had summoned before, erupted from portals at his feet. The chains of heaven, Enkidu. They lashed out, wrapping around the beast's limbs and torso, binding it tight. The monster roared, its immense strength straining the divine chains. Narum didn't summon a finishing blow. He landed in front of the bound creature, his hands flying through a series of complex signs, a muscle memory from a life he now fully remembered. Mana? No. Chakra, it was both. A perfect fusion of the two, gathered in his palm. The air crackled. The golden Rasengan formed again, but this time it grew, fed by the vast reserves of his life force, the echo of the nine-tailed fox deep within him. It swelled to the size of a boulder, a raging vortex of golden energy that distorted the air around it. He drove the massive sphere forward, his face a mask of cold fury. Giant Rasengan. The impact was absolute. The Lamu, the chains that held it, and a 10-foot section of the plaza simply ceased to exist, scoured from reality by the raw, grinding power of the technique. Silence fell, broken only by the whimpering of the wounded and the distant, fading shrieks of the few remaining Lamu as the guards hunted them down. The great fissure in the sky, its foul purpose spent for now, began to stitch itself shut, fading into nothingness. Naram stood in the center of the devastation, breathing heavily. The golden glow of his sage mode receded, the orange pigmentation around his eyes fading. He was just Naram again, but he was also Naruto. He was whole. He looked at his hands, then at the destruction, then at the terrified, awestruck faces of his people. He had saved them. He took a step, intending to help the wounded, when his senses, still preternaturally sharp, picked up a new anomaly. It was not the foulness of the Lamu. This was something else, a flicker of energy in a shadowed alcove hundreds of yards away. It was non-native to Uruk, a complex weave of what felt like magecraft, but it was cloaked, trying to be unseen. A recording spell, an observer. He didn't even turn his head. A single, small golden ripple opened by his shoulder. A plain, unassuming steel knife, the kind a kitchen boy might use, emerged. With a flick of his wrist, he sent it flying. It didn't arc. It flew in a perfectly straight line, a silver streak against the smoke-filled air. There was a muffled pop in the distance, a brief flare of blue-white energy, and then nothing. The foreign presence was gone. The message was sent. I see you. He let out a long, slow breath, the adrenaline finally beginning to ebb. The cost of the battle hit him. The bodies of his people. The dead guards. This was not a victory. It was a defense. A costly one. And then, the world turned to gold and blue. A column of light, impossibly brilliant, slammed down into the center of the plaza with the force of a thunderclap, cracking the already damaged stones. It was not the chaotic energy of the fissure, nor the malevolent presence of the Lamu. This was pure, sacred, and overwhelmingly powerful. The very air sang with its presence, a celestial hymn that made the soul ache. Naram threw up an arm to shield his eyes, his senses reeling from the sheer density of the power. It was like standing next to a star. When the light faded, a figure stood in the crater. She was clad in gleaming silver-blue armor, intricately detailed with patterns that spoke of a forgotten age of chivalry. A blue surcoat flowed over the steel plates, emblazoned with a golden lion. Her face was one of exquisite, ageless beauty, framed by fine blonde hair tied back in a neat bun. But her expression was one of hardened duty, and her emerald green eyes, sharp and piercing, were fixed on him. In her gauntleted hands, she held a sword, yet he could not see it. The blade was cloaked in a whirlwind of magical air, a shimmering distortion that made it invisible, unknowable. She was a servant. The sheer pressure she exuded, the quality of her spiritual core, it was unmistakable. A saber class, and one of the highest order. Her senses, however, were clearly in turmoil. Her gaze wasn't just focused on him. It was analytical, horrified, confused. Naram understood instantly what she must be feeling. She was a being of pure, human legend. A bastion of order. And he was a paradox. She would sense the divine, godly power of his bloodline, an existence from the age of gods that should have faded. She would sense the raw, untamed life force coiling within him, the echo of a tailed beast, something monstrous and alien to this world. And she would sense the lingering filth of the Lamu he had just obliterated. Clinging to him like a shroud. God, man, and monster, all wrapped in one. To a knight of the highest caliber, a guardian of human history, he must look like an abomination. She took a half step forward. The ground crunching under her armored boot. The invisible sword leveled, its point aimed directly at his heart. Her voice was clear, strong, and carried the weight of 100 battles and a lonely crown. It was the voice of a king. By order of the counter-force, I have been summoned to face the coming calamity, she declared, her eyes never leaving his. But before I can face the threat to the world, I must ask you. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her invisible blade. What are you? Naram met her gaze. He didn't summon his gates. He didn't ready a stance. He simply stood his ground. The prince of a fallen age and the shinobi of a forgotten war, his own blue eyes meeting her emerald green. The man who was going to save it, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. And you're pointing your sword at the wrong person. The silence stretched, thick with the power of two worlds colliding. The knight and the prince, the servant and the demigod, locked in a standoff amidst the ruins of a golden city, with the fate of the world hanging unspoken between them. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Lion and the Dragon. The invisible blade hummed with a presu. That felt like it could cleave the world in two. It was aimed at Naram's throat, held with a grip that knew nothing of hesitation. The emerald eyes of the knight were just as sharp, filled with the righteous certainty of a divine instrument. Naram didn't flinch. The chaos of the plaza, the wounded crying out, the guards trying to restore order, the smell of ozone and ichor, faded into a muffled backdrop. In this small bubble of reality, there was only the demigod and the servant, a confrontation of impossible beings on a cracked and bloodied stage. The wrong person, the knight repeated, her voice laced with steel. My senses are clear. I feel the divine signature of a bygone age clinging to you, a power that has no place in this era. I feel the monstrous echo of a beast coiled within your soul. And I feel the taint of the very creatures you just fought. You are a paradox, a blight. Explain yourself. Naram let out a short, sharp breath that wasn't quite a laugh. He'd faced down gods and monsters. And he recognized the look in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had been given a target and would see their duty done, no matter the cost. He'd seen it in his own reflection more than once in his past life. My name is Naram. My father is Gilgamesh. That's the divinity you feel, he said, his tone blunt, stripping away the poetry of the situation. The monstrous echo is a long story, but he's not the one causing this mess. And the taint is what happens when you wade through an army of abominations to keep your people from being turned into bloody paste. You're welcome, by the way. He took a half step forward, directly into the threat range of her invisible sword. The pressure intensified, the air around the blade shimmering. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't strike. A king's duty is to his people. Naram continued, his voice dropping slightly, losing its confrontational edge and gaining a weight that was far older than his 20 years. He gestured with a sweep of his hand to the terrified civilians being herded to safety. Those things came to kill them. I stopped them. Whatever grand mission you're on, whatever calamity you were sent to face, that's it. That's the enemy, not me. The knight's gaze flickered for a fraction of a second, taking in the carnage, the dead guards, the weeping families. A flicker of conflict in those resolute eyes. Her duty was clear, but the scene before her was muddying the waters. He had acted as a protector. An unbelievably powerful, anomalous protector, but a protector nonetheless. And then, her posture went rigid. Her eyes widened, losing their focus on him and turning inward. Her grip on the sword slackened, the immense pressure emanating from it vanishing in an instant. A silent, one-sided conversation was taking place. A torrent of information being poured directly into her soul. Naram, his sage mode still faintly active, could feel the raw influx of power, not an attack, but a directive, cold and absolute as a law of physics. It was the will of the world itself. Alaya, she swayed, a hand coming up to her temple as if warding off a headache of cosmic proportions. The download was overwhelming, a compressed history of the coming apocalypse. After a long, tense moment, she exhaled, the sound trembling slightly. She lowered her arm, and the invisible sword dissolved into motes of blue light. The rigid soldier was gone, replaced by someone burdened by a terrible new knowledge. Tiamat, she whispered, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Beast 2, the mother of creation has awakened. She finally looked at him again. And the hostility was gone, replaced by a weary, grim understanding. The counter-force, it did not send me to fight you. It sent me to fight with you. She straightened up, her regal bearing returning. But it was heavier now, weighed down by the truth of her mission. My designation is Saber. I am Artoria Pendragon, and it appears, Naram son of Gilgamesh, that you are the singularity upon which the fate of this world now rests. She said the word, singularity, as if it were a curse. You are either the key to humanity's salvation, or the trigger for its final ruin. My mission is to ensure the former. She paused, her meaning clear. And to eliminate you if you become the latter. Naram nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. A primordial goddess, an apocalypse. A reluctant hero knight sent by the planet's immune system. It was absurd, grandiose, and terrifyingly familiar. Just another war to save the world. All right, Saber, Artoria, he said, testing the name. Let's get out of the open. My people need aid, not two demigods having a staring contest in the middle of their broken city. He turned his back on her, a deliberate act of trust, and his voice boomed across the plaza. A king taking command. Healers to the west quadrant. Guards, secure the perimeter and search for any more of those things. Engineers, I want a damage report in 1 hour. He moved with purpose, kneeling beside a fallen guard, his hand glowing with a soft, green light, a simple healing jutsu from his past, powered by the fusion of chakra and mana. The guard's shallow breathing steadied. Artoria watched him, this strange prince who fought like a demon and healed like a saint. He moved among the wounded, offering a quiet word here, a touch of healing there. He was not a distant king on a throne. He was down in the blood and the dust. He was one of them. An hour later, they stood in a Spartan briefing room near the top of the ziggurat. A single holographic map of the world hovered over a black stone table between them. The initial chaos had been managed. The dead were being honored, the wounded treated. Uruk was already beginning to rebuild. So, Tiamat, Narum began. Getting straight to the point. Primordial goddess. Wants to, what, exactly? Drown the world in mud and turn humanity back into primordial soup. Artoria, standing stiffly by the table, nodded. She is a beast of regression. She seeks to reclaim her children, to dissolve the progress of human history and return all life to the sea of life from which it began. The creatures you fought, the Lamu, are her vanguard. Twisted mockeries of humanity born from her corrupted sea. And you're a grand servant candidate, Narum surmised. The planet's emergency response system. A weapon to be pointed at a world-ending threat. That is the nature of my summoning, she confirmed, her tone clipped. She didn't like being called a weapon, but she didn't deny it. The counter-force has identified several focal points where Tiamat's influence is bleeding into the world, corrupting the ley lines and terraforming the environment. If they are not dealt with, her main body will be able to manifest fully. She pointed a gauntleted finger at a pulsating red dot on the holographic map, deep in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. This is the first and most aggressive nexus. The energy signature suggests a powerful entity is acting as an anchor, a spore, for her corruption. It must be purged. Narum studied the map, his brow furrowed. So we go in, kill whatever's there, and cauterize the wound. We will, Artoria corrected. A subtle emphasis on the first word. My duty is to accompany you, to observe, and to assist. This is our first trial as an alliance. He looked up from the map, his crimson eyes locking onto hers. He could feel the rigid wall of duty she had built around herself, the immense pressure she was under. But beneath it, his enhanced senses detected a deep, profound loneliness. The loneliness of a king who had shouldered the world's burdens alone. It was a feeling he knew all too well. Fine, he said, an alliance. But let's get one thing straight. I'm not your tool, and you're not my bodyguard. We do this as partners, or we don't do it at all. Agreed. She was taken aback by his directness. Partnership was not in her directive. But looking at the sheer, unshakable confidence in his eyes, she saw no other way forward. Agreed. From the gate of Babylon, Narum summoned not a glorious Vimana, but a sleek, matte black aircraft that looked more like a futuristic stealth fighter than a chariot of the gods. It was silent, propelled by magical energy that left no heat signature, and cloaked from all mundane and most magical forms of detection. Artoria watched, her expression unreadable, as the craft's canopy hissed open. A rather subtle treasury you possess. The best weapon is the one your enemy never sees coming, Narum replied, hopping into the pilot's seat. Get in. It'll be faster than a horse. She settled into the co-pilot seat, the cockpit surprisingly spacious even for someone in full armor. The canopy sealed, and with a barely perceptible hum, the craft lifted off. Phasing through the boundary field of Uruk and streaking across the sky at impossible speeds. For a long while, they flew in silence. Below them, the world was a blur of blue ocean and white clouds. Artoria stared stoically ahead, a perfect soldier. Narum, controlling the craft with casual thought, decided to break the tension. A golden ripple appeared between their seats, and a simple red apple floated out. He plucked it from the air and offered it to her. Hungry, she stared at the apple, then at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. You use the treasury of the king, for snacks. Keeps it from going bad, he shrugged. Besides, what's the point of having all the treasures in the world if you can't enjoy the simple ones? He took a crisp bite out of his own apple. The sound was loud in the quiet cockpit. Hesitantly, she took the offered fruit. It felt strange to hold something so mundane, so alive, that had been plucked from a demigod's conceptual armory. My thanks. You know, Naram said, his tone conversational, that invisible sword of yours must be hard to keep clean. She stiffened slightly. It is a ward. My blade is famous. To reveal it is to reveal my identity. In a Holy Grail war, anonymity is a key advantage. We're not in a Holy Grail war, he pointed out. We're fighting mud monsters for the fate of the world. Seems like an unnecessary handicap. You're spending energy to hide it when you could be using that energy to swing it harder. Why not just summon a different sword if you're worried about being recognized? He gestured vaguely, as if to say, like I do. Her lips thinned. It is the sword that chose me. It is the symbol of my kingship. I do not discard it lightly. My tactics are proven. Proven to do what? He pressed, not unkindly. Win battles, or win wars. Because sometimes, to win the war, you have to be willing to fight ugly. Before she could form a rebuttal, an alarm chimed softly. On the main display, the lush green of the Amazon was displayed, but it was marred by a creeping, violet-black corruption that pulsed like a diseased heart. We're here, Naram said, his light-hearted manner vanishing, replaced by a focused intensity. The craft descended, its cloaking field holding strong as it slipped beneath the dense jungle canopy. The moment they stepped out of the aircraft, the wrongness of the place hit them. It was the Amazon, but a perverted, dying version of it. The air was thick and humid, carrying the same briny stench of decay from the plaza in Uruk. Towering trees stood like gray, petrified skeletons. Their branches brittle and bare. The ground was a sludge of black mud that seemed to writhe with a life of its own. The vibrant chorus of jungle life was gone, replaced by an oppressive, listening silence. The corruption is absolute, Artoria stated, her hand resting on the hilt of her invisible sword. She could feel the land itself groaning in agony. Naram's senses were on fire. In sage mode, he could feel the life force of the entire region being siphoned away, drawn towards a single, ravenous point. It's that way, he said, pointing deeper into the twisted jungle. Something huge. It feels hungry. They moved through the corrupted forest, a flash of gold and a shimmer of silver blue against the monochromatic decay. They found the source in a massive, bowl-like sinkhole nearly a mile across. The walls were sheer cliffs of black stone, and the floor was a bubbling marsh of the same putrid mud. In the very center, roosting atop a jagged pillar of obsidian, was the spore. It was a creature of nightmare mythology. It had the body of a colossal pterosaur, a wingspan that could blanket a cathedral, but its flesh was not scales or leather. It was a shifting mass of Tiamat's primordial mud, held in shape by a framework of pale, chitinous bone. Its head was long and cruel, armed with a beak filled with shark-like teeth. Plumes of sickly purple energy vented from its back, and with every beat of its powerful wings, it scattered a fine dust of corruption that turned everything it touched to sludge. A Lamu Kotal, that's our target, Artoria said, her voice grim. She was already assessing the battlefield, her mind running through tactical approaches. Its position is a fortress. We will be exposed on the approach. I will draw its attention with a direct assault. It will focus on me. When it does, you will strike from its flank with your full power. Naram shook his head, his eyes narrowed as he analyzed the beast. Bad plan. It's a flyer, and we're on the ground. It has total aerial dominance. A direct charge is suicide. You'll be a target before you're halfway across the clearing. I am a Saber-class servant. My magic resistance and defensive capabilities are of the highest rank. I can withstand its assault, she retorted, a hint of pride, or perhaps defiance, in her tone. I'm not questioning your durability, he shot back, his voice sharp with the urgency of a field commander. I'm questioning the strategy. Why play to its strengths? We stay mobile. We use the terrain for cover. We harass it. Learn its patterns, find a weakness, then we commit to a killing blow. Don't be a hero, be a soldier. The word, hero, struck a nerve. A king leads from the front. She snapped, her patience finally breaking. They are an ideal for their people to follow. Your methods are those of a rogue, a trickster. They lack honor. Honor won't bring you back to life if that thing's beak punches a hole through your chest. He countered, his voice rising. My people in Uruk are alive because I didn't care about honor. I cared about results. A dead king is no ideal at all. The argument hung in the air, a clash of philosophies as stark as the life and death surrounding them. Before another word could be spoken, the Lamukotl let out a piercing shriek. It had seen them, with a powerful downbeat of its wings that sent a hurricane of foul air rushing up the cliffs. It launched itself from its perch. No time, Artoria yelled, and without waiting for him, she acted. A torrent of brilliant blue-green energy, mana burst, erupted around her. She didn't run down the cliff. She launched herself off it, a silver-blue comet of destruction aimed directly at the heart of the enemy. Idiot, Naram cursed, but there was no time for anger. He leapt after her, golden portals already shimmering into existence around him. Artoria was magnificent. She was a singular force of nature, her invisible blade carving arcs of displaced air as she met the monster's diving charge. She parried a strike from a wing claw that could have shattered a castle wall, the impact sending a shockwave across the clearing. She was a bulwark, a fortress of chivalry against a tide of primordial filth. But Naram was right. She was a single, grounded target for a massive, agile flyer. The Lamukotl screeched and gained altitude, unleashing a barrage of corrupted energy bolts from its maw. Artoria moved with incredible speed, her armor deflecting most, her blade dispelling others, but she was entirely on the defensive, forced to constantly react. Naram, meanwhile, was fighting a different war. He landed on the marshy ground, his shinobi training making him light on his feet. A dozen gates opened above him. Suppressive fire. Harass. Don't kill, he commanded inwardly. A volley of low-powered but incredibly fast blades shot out, peppering the beast's wings and underbelly. They didn't do much damage, but they were irritating, distracting. He formed a hand sign. Shadow clone jutsu. In a puff of smoke, a perfect duplicate of him appeared. As Artoria drew the beast's main attention, the clone and the original broke in opposite directions, creating two targets. You fight like a trickster. Her voice echoed in his mind, a simple telepathic link he had established as they jumped. And you fight like a battering ram. He sent back, gritting his teeth as he dodged a strafing run. He slid through the mud, his hand slamming onto the ground. A swirling vortex of golden mana formed in his palm. Rasengan. He thrust upward as the beast flew low over his position. The sphere of grinding energy connected with its leg, tearing a chunk of primordial mud and bone away. The creature shrieked in pain and fury, its attention momentarily shifting to him. It was the opening Artoria needed. With a surge of mana burst, she leapt onto the creature's back, her invisible sword plunging deep into its shoulder. But it was like stabbing a mountain of animated clay. The wound closed around her blade, and the creature began to roll in the air, trying to crush her against the ground. You're taking too much damage. Naram's voice yelled in her head, laced with genuine frustration. A king is the command piece, the most important one on the board. You don't sacrifice it on the first bad trade. His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. Sacrifice. The word echoed with the ghosts of Camlin, of her knights falling, of her kingdom crumbling because her people saw her as a flawless ideal and not a person. A king's life is worth no more than any of her subjects. She shot back, her voice strained as she wrenched her sword free and dodged a snap of the creature's beak. She must be willing to give it for them. They were getting nowhere. The beast was too durable. Its regenerative abilities too strong. Their disparate styles were canceling each other out. The Lamukotl, enraged, landed heavily, shaking the entire sinkhole. It ignored Naram and his clones, focusing all its hatred on the shining knight who had wounded it. It opened its beak wide, a malevolent purple light gathering within, a torrent of corrupting energy aimed directly at Artoria. There was no time to dodge. Suddenly, Naram was in front of her. Not with a weapon, but with a massive, ornate shield summoned from a gate. It depicted 7 layers of vibrant pink petals, a flower of impossible resilience. Ro Ayas. The name was a memory, a treasure he hadn't known he possessed. The beam of corruption slammed into the shield. The first 4 layers shattered instantly, but the final 3 held, buying them precious seconds. The force of the impact threw both of them backward, skidding across the sludge. Narum landed on one knee, the shield dissolving. He was breathing heavily. "See, this isn't working." He looked at her, his expression deadly serious. "Your way isn't working. My way isn't working. We need our way." Artoria stared at him, her armor smudged with black mud, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The raw power of the blast she had just been shielded from. He had saved her life, without question. He had used a defensive noble phantasm of incredible power not to protect himself, but to protect her. She finally nodded, her pride giving way to the cold logic of the battlefield. "What do you propose?" A grin, sharp and predatory, touched Narum's lips. It was the grin of a man who saw the path to victory. "You want to be the ideal, the symbol, then be the brightest damn symbol this world has ever seen. Get its attention. All of it. Don't hold back. I'll set up the finish." She understood. It was her initial plan, but with a crucial difference. It was no longer a lone charge, it was a coordinated strike. It was trust. "Very well," she said. And her entire demeanor changed. The doubts and frustrations vanished. She was no longer just a soldier. She was the king of knights, unleashing her full legend. An inferno of mana erupted from her, so bright it bleached the color from the corrupted landscape. She became a star of pure power, a beacon of human history standing defiant against the primordial dark. The Lamu-Kodal forgot Narum, forgot everything but the blinding, infuriating light of the night before it. It charged, a mountain of rage and claws. Artoria met the charge, not with a single strike, but with a storm of them. Her invisible blade a blur of impossible speed and power. She was no longer just defending. She was dominating, forcing the beast back step by step, a one-woman army holding the line. This was the opening Narum needed. He moved, no longer a harasser but a hunter. The ground at his feet erupted with dozens of golden portals. From them, the chains of heaven, Enkidu, shot out. They were not just chains, they were a concept. The absolute binding of the divine. They snaked through the air, ignoring the beast's thrashing, and latched onto its limbs, its wings, its neck. The Lamu-Kodal, which had shrugged off swords and energy blasts, froze. The chains glowed with golden light, tightening, sapping its strength, dragging it down. The higher its own divinity, the stronger the chains held. It was pinned, pulled taut, a helpless sacrifice bound to an altar of mud. "Saber, now!" Narum roared, his own power flaring as he poured energy into maintaining the binding. Artoria saw her moment. She planted her feet, the ground cracking beneath them. She raised her blade, and for the first time, the whirlwind of air around it dissipated, revealing the sword beneath. It was a weapon of breathtaking beauty, a golden hilt and a blade that seemed to be forged from captured starlight. All the mana she had gathered, all the power of her legend, all the hope of the human spirit she embodied, converged on that single point. Excalibur. She didn't swing, she thrust. A beam of pure, holy light, concentrated to the width of a spear, shot from the tip of her sword. It wasn't a wide wave of destruction, it was a focused, piercing lance of annihilation aimed directly at the beast's core. The backlash was instantaneous and violent. The release of that much power at such close range created a shockwave of raw energy that would have vaporized anyone nearby. But Narum was ready. As she unleashed her attack, he summoned another defense from his gate, a massive, 7-ringed shield forged of bronze and layered ox hide. A bulwark of legend, and planted it directly behind her. The wave of energy crashed against the shield, which groaned and cracked under the strain, but held. The beam of Excalibur, meanwhile, struck the bound Lamu-Kodal. There was no explosion, only a silent, blinding flash of gold. The beast, the obsidian pillar, and a significant portion of the primordial mud simply vanished, atomized by the sword of promised victory. The light faded. The chains of Enkidu, their target gone, retracted into their portals. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, the silence no longer menacing but empty. Faintly, in the distance, the first tentative chirp of a cricket could be heard. Life was already returning. Artoria stood, leaning heavily on her now visible sword, her body drained of nearly all its mana. Narum dismissed the cracked and smoking shield, breathing heavily. The synchronized attack had taken a toll on them both. For a moment, they just stood there in the quiet devastation. Then, Artoria spoke, her voice low. Your shield, it protected me from the backlash. That was the plan, Narum said, walking over. The ground was already starting to feel more solid under his feet. Big moves have big costs. Gotta be ready for them. He stopped in front of her. The argument from before felt like a lifetime ago. You were right, he admitted, surprising her. A king does need to be a symbol. I saw it. The way you burned. That was something else. Something I couldn't do. She looked up, meeting his gaze. And you were right, she conceded, her own voice quiet with dawning respect. A symbol is meaningless if it leads to a foolish death. Your chains, your tactics, they created the victory, not my strength alone. She paused. That was the most unkingly, and the most effective battle I have ever been a part of. He grinned, a genuine, tired smile. I'll take that as a compliment. Their ideological clash hadn't been resolved, but it had found a middle ground. A place of mutual respect built not on words, but on the shared trust of a perfectly executed battle. He saw the unshakable core of her convictions, and she saw the brilliant, tactical mind behind his chaotic methods. He offered her a hand. Come on, Your Majesty, let's go home. She looked at his offered hand, then back at his face. This time, she took it without hesitation. Her gauntleted fingers were cold against his warm skin. But the grip was firm. It was the grip of a partner. Thousands of miles away, in a chamber where the only light came from glowing magical circles embedded in the floor, Lord Valerius Bartholomew watched the final. Fragmented images from his destroyed familiar. The drone's senses had been scrambled by the sheer energy outputs, but the data, though corrupted, was clear enough. He saw a vortex of golden energy that was not magecraft. He saw the flash of divine chains. He saw the impossible brilliance of a full-power Excalibur release. And most importantly, he saw the seamless, terrifying synergy between the two beings. A living remnant of the Age of Gods, possessing a treasury that rivals his father's, Valerius murmured, his voice as cold and precise as a scalpel. And a top-tier servant. A king of knights, bound not to a master but to the world itself, acting in concert with him. He steepled his fingers, his expression one of deep, intellectual distaste. The Lamu, Tiamat, they were a problem. A mess to be cleaned up. But they were a known quantity, a threat that fit within the established paradigms of magical theory. Narum was not. He was an unknown. AAC. NGU Larity whose very existence was a threat to the order established by the Mages Association. He represented a return to an age where humanity knelt to capricious gods, an age that mages had spent 2,000 years working to end. He was a cancer on the age of man. A figure stepped from the shadows. He was young, with sharp features and colder eyes, clad in the impeccable black uniform of a clock tower enforcer. Kalen. The data is extraordinary, my lord, Kalen said, his voice a low hum of barely contained ambition. Their combined power output is beyond anything we have on file for a rogue pairing. It is not their power that is the primary threat, Kalen, Valerius corrected smoothly. It is their nature. He is a regression, a defiance of the world's natural progression. He cannot be allowed to become a new cornerstone of power. Valerius's gaze turned to the final, frozen image on his display, Narum and Artoria, standing together amidst the destruction. The servant is a complication, but her purpose is finite. He is permanent. He turned his cool, calculating gaze to his subordinate. Assemble the golems from the Einsborn collaboration. Requisition the Gander Specia, lists from the Department of Fundamentals. And activate Project Gorgon's Eye. You will lead a new task force. Your designation will be containment. Your primary target is the singularity, Narum of Uruk. The servant is to be considered a secondary obstacle. Valerius leaned back in his chair, a faint, chilling smile on his lips. Observe him, test him, understand him, and when the moment is right, remove this chaotic variable from the board. Permanently. Chapter 2 end. Chapter 3. The City of Mages. The flight to London was a study in contrasts. Outside the cockpit's crystalline canopy, the curve of the earth was a serene masterpiece of blue and white, a sight of profound peace. Inside, the silence was a coiled spring, thick with the unspoken tension of their next move. Artoria sat ramrod straight in her seat, her gauntleted hands resting on her knees, a perfect statue of knightly vigilance. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, but Narum knew she wasn't seeing the clouds. She was seeing a battlefield of words, a war of whispers and pleasantries, and it unnerved her more than any monster of mud and claw. Narum piloted the silent craft with an easy, innate grace, his mind monitoring their course. The surrounding magical energies, and the quiet storm brewing in the woman beside him. He could feel her discomfort like a low-frequency hum in the air, a rigid containment of anxiety that was utterly at odds with the explosive confidence she displayed in battle. He broke the silence. "You're thinking too loud." Artoria's head snapped toward him, her emerald eyes sharp with surprise. "I have said nothing. You didn't have to," he replied, banking the craft gently to adjust for the planet's rotation. "Your posture is stiffer than the armor you're wearing. You look like you're about to face a dragon. Not have a conversation." Her expression tightened. It was a private vulnerability, and his casual observation of it felt like an intrusion. "Political maneuvering is a different kind of war. One I have less aptitude for. A blade is honest. A treaty is a tapestry of lies waiting to be unraveled." The admission was quiet, tinged with the bitterness of old memories. Narum's sage mode, always simmering just beneath the surface, didn't just hear the words, it felt the echo of the emotions behind them. He felt the phantom weight of a crown, the sting of betrayal from trusted advisors. The suffocating loneliness of a court where every smile was a mask. He felt the ghost of Camlin. He didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. He offered his own truth, stripped of pretense. "I get it. In my other life, I was surrounded by them. Old councilmen who thought they knew better, feudal lords who only cared about their own lands, spies who would sell you out for the right price." A faint, wry smile touched his lips. "They talk in circles, trying to make you dizzy so they can pick your pocket. The trick is not to spin with them." Artoria looked at him, intrigued despite herself. "And what is your proposed strategy? Then, to charge in and make demands as you did in the plaza?" "No," Narum said, and his expression became serious, his crimson eyes holding hers. "You walk in, you look them square in the eye, and you tell them the simple, unvarnished truth. The world is ending. A primordial goddess is waking up. We are the only ones who can stop it. We need your help. That's it. They will laugh us out of the room," she stated, a certainty born of experience. "They will demand proof, concessions, authority. They will see your power and call it a threat. They will see me and call me a tool to be controlled." "Let them," he said, and the conviction in his voice was absolute. "We're not there to ask for permission. We're there to give them a choice. They can be on the right side of history, or they can be swept away with the rest of it. As for the lies, just listen. Not with your ears, with your gut. People like that, their ambition smells. It's cold and sharp, like steel and old paper. When you feel it, you know they're lying. And when you know they're lying, you call them on it. Right to their face." He was describing his sage mode's ability to sense intent, but framing it as simple intuition. It was advice so stunningly, almost childishly, direct that it looped all the way back around to being profound. It was the philosophy of Naruto Uzumaki, who had broken through cycles of hatred and ancient conspiracies not with intricate political theory, but with stubborn, heartfelt honesty and a Rasengan to the face of anyone who refused to listen. Artoria considered his words. It was the antithesis of every lesson she had learned as king. She had been taught to be shrewd, to be diplomatic, to weigh every word. That path had ended in fire and bloodshed. Perhaps this reckless honesty, had a merit she had never considered. A bold strategy, she finally allowed, a hint of grudging admiration in her tone. And a foolish one. Bold and foolish are two sides of the same coin. Narum grinned. Depends on whether you win or lose. Below them, the patchwork green of the English countryside gave way to the sprawling grey geometry of London. Narum brought the craft down in a cloaked descent, landing silently in a desolate, abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts, a pre-scouted location far from prying eyes. "Stay armored," he advised as the canopy hissed open. "But try to relax. You look like you're about to invade France." Her only reply was a sharp, indignant glare, but he saw the corner of her mouth twitch almost imperceptibly. The clock tower was not a single tower. It was a hidden, sprawling complex secreted away beneath the British Museum, a nexus of magical energy and academic arrogance that felt ancient and suffocating. To enter, one did not simply walk through a door. One had to present themselves at a specific, unmarked location and be accepted by the layered boundary fields. As they approached the designated public entrance, a quiet, unassuming tea shop, Naram could feel the shift. The natural energy of the world grew thin, suppressed by a dense, suffocating blanket of structured magecraft. It was like walking from an open field into a lead-lined box. The air itself felt old, tasting of dust, dried ink, and the ozone tang of a million spent spells. They were immediately the focus of attention. Mages in severe, academic robes walking by would slow, their eyes widening. Their gazes would pass over Artoria first, a flicker of recognition for the legendary energy signature of a saber-class servant, a being of history they studied and revered. There was awe there, mixed with a healthy dose of academic curiosity, as if she were a priceless artifact that had suddenly come to life. Then their eyes would land on Naram. The reaction was entirely different. It was not awe, it was a primal, instinctual recoil. His very presence was an affront to this place. He was a being of divine blood and natural energy, a walking, breathing relic from the age of gods they so painstakingly sought to leave behind. His life force, a fusion of his demigod nature and Karama's vast echo, burned like a sun in their world of carefully regulated candles. They felt the sheer, untamed power of him, and it terrified them. Whispers broke out, subtle warding gestures were made. More than one magus discreetly checked the setting. On the mystic code bracelets on their wrists. They do not like you, Artoria observed quietly, her own senses picking up the hostility. The feeling's mutual, Naram muttered back. This place feels like a tomb. A tall, severe-looking woman with her hair in a tight bun, a high-ranking official by the mana flowing through her tailored suit, approached them. Her face was a mask of professional courtesy that didn't reach her eyes. Saber, Lord Naram, she greeted them, her voice crisp. Lord Bartholomew will grant you an audience. Please, follow me. She led them through corridors that defied conventional geometry. Hallways lined with floating bookshelves stretched into impossible distances. Doorways opened into vast lecture halls where the constellations wheeled across the ceiling. It was a place of immense knowledge and even greater pride. Naram ignored the architectural wonders, his senses focused on the people. He felt their ambition, their jealousy, their fear. It was a snake pit of intellectuals. More dangerous in its own way than any battlefield. They were shown into an office at the heart of the complex. It was a large, circular room, the walls lined from floor to ceiling with ancient, leather-bound tomes. There was no visible light source, yet the room was filled with a cold, even luminescence that cast no shadows. Behind a vast, polished mahogany desk sat a man who seemed to be carved from ice. Lord Valerius Bartholomew. He was handsome in a severe, aristocratic way, with pale blonde hair and eyes the color of a winter sky. He exuded an aura of absolute, unshakable control. The magical energy in the room bent to his will, a silent testament to his authority. Across from him, standing silently by the wall, was the young man Naram recognized from the subconscious feed of the destroyed drone. Kalen. His eyes were dark and watchful, a predator waiting patiently for the order to strike. Prince Naram. Saber, Valerius began, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. He gestured to the two chairs before his desk. Please, welcome to the clock tower. I must confess, your arrival has been the talk of the decade. Naram and Artoria sat. The chairs were surprisingly comfortable, a small, disarming detail in a room designed for intimidation. We are not here for pleasantries, Lord Valerius, Artoria began, taking the lead as they had tacitly agreed. Her voice was formal, regal. The world faces a threat of unprecedented scale. A beast of calamity, Tiamat, has begun to awaken. We have come to share our intelligence and request the aid of the Mages Association in confronting this enemy. Valerius steepled his fingers, his cool gaze shifting from Artoria to Naram. A beast, he mused, as if discussing a particularly interesting theorem. Yes, our own sensors have detected disturbances. Ley lines destabilizing. A massive surge of anomalous energy originating from Mesopotamia. That would be your Uruk, I presume, Prince Naram. The question was casual, but the implication was clear. This started with you. The fissure opened in my city, Narum stated flatly, cutting off the veiled accusation. We were the first to be attacked. We were the first to fight back. Indeed, Valerius said, his lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. He turned his attention fully to Artoria. And you, Knight of the Sword. A grand servant candidate summoned by Elia itself. A figure of perfect order. A legend of humanity brought forth to defend it. Your presence is reassuring. You represent the pinnacle of what a hero should be, disciplined, powerful, and ND by the very laws of human history you seek to protect. The praise was thick and sweet, designed to appeal directly to Artoria's core identity. Narum felt it for what it was, an attempt to drive a wedge, to create a schism. She is one of us. He is not. Then Valerius's gaze, like a physical weight, settled on Narum. The smile faded, replaced by an expression of detached clinical interest. You, however, are another matter entirely. The son of the King of Heroes, a demigod walking in the age of man. Your very existence is a contradiction, a regression. The power you wield, it is not the structured, predictable art of magecraft. It is the chaotic, primordial force of the divine. A power that humanity has rightly struggled for millennia to move beyond. The power I wield saved an entire city of people, Narum said. His voice level, and it destroyed the monster you sent us to fight. It seems pretty useful to me. Usefulness and stability are often at odds, Valerius countered smoothly. A forest fire is useful for clearing dead brush, but it is not something one wishes to live alongside. Your power, Prince Narum, is a wildfire in an age of carefully cultivated gardens. It threatens to burn down the order we have so painstakingly built. Artoria shifted, her armor creaking softly. She could feel the trap closing. Valerius was framing this not as a matter of survival, but of ideology. Lord Valerius, she interjected, her tone sharp. Narum's nature is irrelevant. He is fighting to protect this world. That should be our only concern. Should it? Valerius leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. Saber, you are a guardian of the human order. What happens after Tiamat is defeated? What becomes of a world where a being with the power of a god can act with impunity, unbound by our laws? Unbound by the very decline of mystery that ensures humanity's continued dominion. His victory could be a greater threat in the long term than Tiamat's attack. Narum had heard enough. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on his knees, his expression utterly devoid of theatrics. He looked directly into Valerius's cold eyes, and his sage mode flared, not to be seen, but to be felt. He wasn't just looking at the man, he was dissecting his soul. He felt the vast, chilling ambition, the utter conviction in his own righteousness, the deeply ingrained belief that humanity was a project to be managed, not a people to be protected. There was no warmth, no empathy, only the cold, clean logic of control. Let's stop wasting time, Narum said, his voice quiet, but cutting through the room's oppressive atmosphere like a hot knife. You don't care about Tiamat. She's just a problem, and you think you can manage her. You care about me. You're terrified that a power you don't understand and can't control exists. You talk about human order, but what you mean is your order. An order where you and the clock tower decide what's right and what's not, who lives and who dies. Valerius's composure finally fractured. A flicker of genuine surprise, quickly suppressed, crossed his features. Kalen, by the wall, tensed, his hand inching towards the inside of his coat. Narum didn't relent. You want to know my plan for after Tiamat is gone. I'm going to go home. That's it. But while she's here, I'm going to fight her with everything I have. You have two choices. You can help us, with your resources and your knowledge, and we can save the world together. Or you can stand aside and let us do it. But if you get in my way, he paused, letting the weight of the words settle. I will walk right through you. Is that clear enough for you, Lord Bartholomew? Or do I need to use smaller words? The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it hung in the air. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't threatened with displays of power. He had simply spoken the truth as he saw it, with a certainty that was more intimidating than any explosion. Valerius stared at him for a long moment. The mask of civility reforming over his face, but it was thinner now, more brittle. Your directness, is refreshing, if misguided, he said, his voice tight. He rose from his desk, a clear dismissal. The Mages Association will take your request under advisement. We will need time to deliberate on the best course of action. In the meantime, you will be shown to guest quarters. We insist you accept our hospitality. It would be unwise to wander the city unescorted. It was a threat veiled as an offer. You are now our prisoners. Narum rose, giving a sharp, almost mocking nod. Great, I could use a nap. The severe-looking woman escorted them out, leaving Valerius and Kalen alone in the silent room. My lord, Kalen began, his voice a low growl. He is arrogant, uncouth, an utter barbarian. He is far worse than that, Valerius corrected, his gaze distant and calculating. He is not a barbarian. A barbarian can be cowed by a show of force. He is a force of nature. He does not play our game. He doesn't even acknowledge the board exists. He turned to his subordinate, his eyes like chips of ice. The test is no longer optional. It is a necessity. I need to know everything. His limits, his weaknesses, his psychological state. Activate the labyrinth protocol. Use the Einsborn golems. I want him broken down into quantifiable data. Tonight, the guest quarters were opulent. Silk tapestries, enchanted paintings whose scenery subtly shifted, a table laden with exquisite food and wine. But it was a cage, and they both knew it. Narum could feel the complex web of wards woven into the very stone of the walls. Designed to suppress, to monitor, to contain. He is going to try to kill us, Artoria stated, her back to him as she stared out the reinforced window at a magically simulated night sky. Nope, Narum said, shocking her. He had already picked up a piece of roasted fowl from the table and was eating it with his hands. He's not yet. You heard him. He sees you as a threat to his entire world order. Exactly, Narum said around a mouthful. He swallowed, then pointed the leg bone at her. He's a control freak, and I'm a variable he can't calculate. People like that don't destroy the thing they don't understand. They take it apart to see how it works. He's not sending assassins. He's sending lab technicians with very sharp scalpels. They're coming to test us. To gather data. She turned to face him, her expression a mixture of frustration and dawning comprehension. You provoked him deliberately. Of course I did, he confirmed. Better to have the fight on our terms. When we're expecting it, than to get ambushed a week from now when we're knee-deep in Lamu. This way, we know who the enemy is. No more guessing. He took another bite of chicken. You should eat. You're going to need the energy. Artoria looked at him. So infuriatingly calm, so utterly certain in the face of a threat that had her on edge. His bluntness in the meeting, which she had first seen as reckless, she now understood as a calculated strategic move. He had forced Valerius's hand, turning a cold war of political maneuvering into a hot conflict they were prepared for. He hadn't just rejected the game board, he'd flipped it over. She walked to the table, removed her gauntlets, and picked up a bread roll. You are the most unorthodox commander I have ever served with. I'm not a commander, and you're not serving with me, he corrected gently. We're partners, and we've got a long night ahead of us. The attack did not come with a crash. It came with a profound and sudden silence. One moment, Narum was examining the warding schemes on the walls, and Artoria was mentally preparing herself. The next, the ambient hum of the clock tower vanished. The enchanted lights flickered and died, plunging the room into absolute darkness. The air grew heavy, thick, and still. They're isolating the space. Narum's voice cut through the black, calm and steady. See, cutting us off from the rest of the complex. Then, the floor vanished. It didn't drop. It simply ceased to be. They were falling through a black, empty void. Artoria instinctively ignited her mana burst. A flare of blue-green light that illuminated their immediate surroundings, but there was nothing to see but an endless fall. Narum didn't seem perturbed. Golden ripples appeared beneath his feet, and a series of gleaming discs materialized, forming a makeshift staircase in the air. He landed on one as lightly as a cat. Show-offs, he muttered. Where are we? Artoria demanded, using her energy to hover beside him. Still in the room, he replied, his eyes scanning the darkness. His sage mode was a beacon in the sensory deprivation, allowing him to feel the architecture of the spell around them. They've just folded space, made it a little bigger. As if on cue, the Walls of their void lit up, revealing they were now in a colossal, shifting labyrinth of gray stone. Corridors twisted at impossible angles. Floors became ceilings, and the entire structure seemed to be in constant, grinding motion. From the shifting walls, figures began to emerge. They were not human. They were hulking, 7-foot-tall golems. Their bodies a seamless fusion of pale, porcelain-like material and silver filigree. They moved with a silent, unnerving grace, their faces blank masks, and in their hands they held weapons that glowed with a faint, sickly light. Einsborn golems, some of the finest magical constructs ever made. But they weren't the only threat. From shadowy alcoves, robed enforcers appeared, their faces hidden by cowls. They didn't attack directly. They pointed their fingers, and small, black, bullet-like bolts of energy shot through the air. Gander shots, Artoria warned, deflecting one with her invisible sword. The curse flared harmlessly against her A-rank magic resistance. Narum simply sidestepped two of them, his movements economical and precise. He knew the shots weren't meant to be lethal. They were meant to curse, to weaken, to slow him down. "They're trying to separate us," he yelled, as a stone wall slammed down between him and Artoria. "I am aware." Her voice came back, followed by the sound of a massive impact as she undoubtedly tried to smash through it. Narum found himself facing three of the Einsborn golems alone. They moved in perfect synchronization, a dance of death. One swung a massive warhammer, another thrust with a spear, and the third fired a beam of concussive force from its palm. He didn't meet their force with his own. He flowed around it. A golden portal opened above the hammer-wielding golem, dropping a thick, heavy chain that wrapped around its weapon arm, fouling the swing. He slid under the spear thrust, summoning a kite shield fro. His gate to deflect the energy beam into the ceiling. This wasn't a fight for annihilation. It was a test, and Narum refused to give them the data they wanted. He didn't use his Rasengan. He didn't use Enkidu. He fought with the basic tools of his treasury and the superb physical skills of his past life, a whirlwind of motion, parries, and brilliantly timed summons. He was fighting like a ninja, not a demigod. On the other side of the wall, Artoria faced a similar assault. But her approach was different. She was a knight, a direct force. Where Narum was a river flowing around obstacles, she was a tidal wave that crashed through them. Her invisible sword, wreathed in mana burst, was a blur of destruction. She carved through the golems, porcelain bodies, their advanced construction proving brittle against the force of a top-tier servant. But for every one she cut down, two more emerged from the shifting walls. They were endlessly replaceable, and the enforcers, Gander shots, while not harming her, were a constant, draining nuisance. "Narum, this is pointless." Her voice echoed through their telepathic link. "We are wasting energy. That's the point. They want to see how much we have." He sent back, kicking off a wall to dodge another coordinated strike. "They're recording everything, every spell, every move, every joule of energy we expend." He needed to end this, but not by winning. By escaping. He felt a spike of power from a level above them. Kalen, the puppet master, observing his experiment. "Artoria, on my mark, full power to the wall on your left." He commanded. "What are you? Just do it." Narum clapped his hands together. Shadow clone jutsu. 5 duplicates appeared, instantly engaging the golems and enforcers, a chaotic melee of golden portals and basic Ijutsu that threw the attacker's perfect coordination into disarray. The real Narum, meanwhile, leapt upwards, running directly up a vertical wall. Kalen, observing from a magically concealed platform, narrowed his eyes. Reckless. He's exposing himself. Narum's hands flew through a series of seals. He took a deep breath, and a massive amount of chakra and mana churned within him. But it wasn't for an attack. Summoning art. Great flower cloud. From 100 open portals, not weapons, but a colossal, thick cloud of fine white flour, the contents of some conceptual bakery prototype from his treasury, billowed out, instantly filling the entire section of the labyrinth. It was a massive, opaque smokescreen, a tactic so absurdly low-tech and unexpected that the magically attuned senses of the enforcers were momentarily blinded. "Now," Narum roared. On the other side of the wall, Artoria didn't hesitate. Trusting him completely, she focused her power. Not into a beam, but into a single, explosive mana burst. She slammed her armored fist into the wall Narum had designated. The enchanted stone, designed to withstand magical blasts, wasn't prepared for a blow of pure, kinetic force from a servant of her caliber. It didn't just break, it exploded outwards in a shower of rubble. Narum, his senses guiding him through his own smokescreen, shot through the newly made opening like a bullet. He grabbed Artoria's arm. This way. They sprinted down a corridor that was already beginning to twist and reform, Kalen's enforcers trying to reacquire their targets through the dispersing flower cloud. They'll just rebuild the maze around us. Artoria panted as they ran. They can't rebuild the outside world. Narum replied. He skidded to a halt in front of a solid outer wall of the complex. He placed his palm against it, feeling the layers of runes, the structural enforcement spells, the very concept of the clock tower's authority. He wasn't going to break it. He was going to cheat. A single golden portal opened beside him. From it, he pulled a small, unassuming, rust-colored key. It was not a weapon. It was a master key from his treasury, a low-level conceptual tool capable of unlocking any non-magical lock. But Narum, fusing its simple concept with his own chakra, gave it a new purpose. He wasn't unlocking a door. He was unlocking the idea of a boundary. He pressed the key to the wall. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a section of the wall, about the size of a doorway, shimmered and turned translucent. The dense wards and reinforcement spells in that one spot simply unraveled. For a single, fleeting second, it was just a wall of ordinary stone and mortar. Artoria didn't need to be told twice. With a final, desperate surge of mana burst, she shouldered the weakened section of the wall. It blew apart, revealing the cool, damp air and the lights of the real London outside. They burst through the hole, landing in a grimy back alley behind the British Museum. Sounds of traffic and the city a welcome shock after the crushing silence of the labyrinth. Behind them, the hole in reality sealed itself shut, the clock tower withdrawing its claws. Kalen stood on his platform amidst the dissipating flower cloud, staring at the spot where they had escaped. His fists were clenched. They had not been defeated. They had not been contained. They had simply refused to play and walked off the board. He had terabytes of data on their defensive capabilities, their speed, their teamwork, but almost nothing on their true offensive power. Narum had shown him nothing of consequence. No divine constructs, no ultimate techniques. He had beaten one of the most advanced magical traps in the world with a shadow clone, a bag of flour, and a skeleton key. The sheer, ulting disrespect of it was more infuriating than any defeat. On a rain-slicked rooftop overlooking the Thames, Narum and Artoria finally stopped running. The city lights glittered on the dark, flowing water below. They were free, but they were also marked. They were now fugitives from the most powerful organization of mages in the world, in addition to being the world's only hope against a primordial goddess. Well, Narum panted, leaning against a chimney, a tired but triumphant grin on his face. That could have gone better. Artoria, leaning on her knees to catch her breath, looked up at him. Her armor was dusty, her hair had strands loose from its perfect bun, and her face was smudged with grime. She looked less like a perfect king of legend and more like a tired soldier after a hard-won skirmish. A small, weary, but genuine smile touched her lips. It also, she admitted, her voice losing its regal stiffness and becoming something softer, more human, could have gone much worse. They stood there in the quiet of the London night, two impossible beings from different worlds, united by the enemies at their backs and the impossible task before them. They were alone, together, and for the first time. That felt like it might just be enough. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Sea of Life. The escape from the clock tower was not a clean one. It was a declaration of war. Narum knew they were being hunted. And Valerius was not a man to accept humiliation lightly. They couldn't stay in London. They couldn't stay anywhere for long. They found refuge in a place so mundane it was the perfect hiding spot, a small, forgotten cottage on the misty coast of Ireland, owned by a reclusive Magus family that had owed Narum's father a favor from a forgotten century. It was a quaint, whitewashed building with a thatched roof, surrounded by windswept fields of green that tumbled down to a churning gray sea. The air tasted of salt and rain, a scent that stirred the depths of Narum's oldest memories. For 2 days, they did nothing but recover. Artoria, her armor dismissed in favor of a simple blue dress borrowed from the cottage's old wardrobe, spent hours staring out at the ocean, her expression distant and troubled. The battle in the clock tower hadn't drained her physically as much as it had mentally. It was the kind of dishonorable, shadowy conflict she despised, a war fought with traps and lies. Narum gave her space. He spent his time in a state of active meditation, seated on the cliff's edge with his legs crossed, the sea spray misting his face. He was not idle. He was expanding his senses, letting his sage mode perception stretch out across the globe like a living net. He felt the planet's agony, the network of ley lines thrumming with a feverish, sickly energy. Tiamat's influence was spreading, a creeping infection in the world's veins. On the morning of the 3rd day, he found her on the cliff path, a solitary figure in blue against the vast, gray canvas of the sky and sea. "Anything?" she asked, not turning to look at him. Her voice was quiet, carried away by the wind. "She's getting stronger," he answered, coming to stand beside her. "The Nexus we poo, RGED in the Amazon, it was like cutting one root of a weed. 2 more have sprung up in its place. One in the Siberian tundra, another in the Sahara. The corruption is accelerating." He paused, his gaze turning serious. "But that's not the worst of it. There's something else, a focal point far more powerful than the others. It's vast, and it feels wrong, horribly wrong." He opened his hand, and a golden ripple shimmered in the air. From it, he pulled not a weapon, but a detailed, 3-dimensional holographic map of the globe, which hovered between them, rotating slowly. He pointed to a spot off the coast of Japan. It pulsed with a malevolent, black-purple light that dwarfed the other nexus points. "Here," he said, "the energy readings are off the charts. It's not just corrupting the land anymore. It's creating something, birthing it." Artoria's eyes widened as she recognized the location. That is, near Fuyuki City. The name was a ghost on her lips, a place of pain and broken promises from another war, another life. A place she had hoped never to see again. "What's it doing?" she asked, forcing the memories down. Narum's expression was grim. "It's creating a new sea of life. A primordial ocean, Tiamat's domain. Right in the middle of our own. Anything that falls into it, any ship, any marine life, any person, its life force is instantly dissolved and absorbed, feeding her, helping her manifest." The sheer horror of it was staggering. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a factory of death, a self-perpetuating engine of planetary destruction. "Then we have no choice," Artoria stated, her resolve hardening. "The soldier returning. We must go there and destroy it, whatever the cost." "It's not going to be that simple," Narum said, his voice low. "There's a guardian, something powerful, a single, massive energy signature at its heart, acting as an anchor. It feels familiar, somehow. Like a distorted echo." The journey to Japan was tense. They flew in Narum's cloaked craft, skimming the waves. The world below a dark, churning expanse. The closer they got, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The sky turned a bruised, sickly purple. The ocean below was no longer blue, but a thick, oily black. Unnaturally still and lifeless. There were no birds, no dolphins, no sign of life at all. The world felt like it was holding its breath. They brought the craft to a halt several miles out, hovering invisibly above the unnatural sea. Before them lay a sight of pure, cosmic horror. The sea of life was a perfect circle of blackness, miles in diameter, surrounded by a shimmering, heat-like distortion field. The water within it was not water. It was a glossy, writhing substance like liquid obsidian. In the center of this dead sea, a jagged island of pale, chitinous material had risen from the depths. A twisted mockery of Tiamat's own horns of authority. And standing upon the highest spire of that island was a figure. Even from this distance, they could see him. A knight in black, jagged armor that seemed to be forged from solidified madness. A miasma of black and red energy poured from him, tainting the very air. In his hand, he held a dark, demonic sword that pulsed with a sorrowful light. He stood motionless, a solitary sentinel guarding the heart of the apocalypse. Artoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She didn't need Narum's enhanced senses to recognize the spiritual signature. The specific weight of the soul, even twisted and corrupted as it was. It was a presence seared into her memory, a part of her own legend. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. It cannot be. Narum looked at her, saw the blood drain from her face, the utter devastation in her eyes. Artoria, who is it? The Knight of the Lake, she breathed, her voice filled with a pain so profound it was a physical thing. The flower of chivalry, the greatest of my knights, and the reason for my kingdom's fall. Her gaze was fixed on the distant figure, a look of horrified recognition and deep, personal grief. Lancelot. The name hung in the cockpit, heavy and dreadful. The guardian of Tiamat's new world was not some random monster. It was Artoria's most beloved friend, her greatest champion. Twisted and enslaved by the primordial mother. Valerius's political maneuvering was a child's game compared to this. This was a wound aimed directly at Artoria's soul. He must be a different version. A berserker, summoned and corrupted, Narum reasoned, trying to find a logical explanation, trying to shield her from the pain. It does not matter, she said, her voice regaining a fraction of its strength. Though it was brittle as glass. His soul is the same. She has taken him, defiled him. This is a cruelty beyond measure. She turned to Narum, her emerald eyes shining with unshed tears. But her jaw was set with grim determination. I must face him. Artoria, you're in no state. I must, she insisted, her voice rising with a desperate intensity. This is my burden to bear. The sins of my past, my failures as a king, they led him down a path of madness. I am the only one who can grant him peace. I will not allow him to remain a puppet for that thing. Her hand clenched on the hilt of her invisible sword. This is my fight, alone. Narum looked at her, at the raw agony and iron resolve warring in her expression. He knew that look. It was the same look he had when he faced Sasuke at the Valley of the End. A fight that was so personal, so deeply woven into the fabric of your soul, that no one else could interfere. To deny her this would be a greater cruelty than the battle itself. But he wouldn't let her go in truly alone. All right, he said softly. You face him, but you won't be doing it while an army of those mud freaks is crawling up your back. His expression hardened. I'll handle the Lamu, all of them. I'll buy you the time you need. I'll keep the entire damn ocean off you. Just come back. The last two words were quiet, not a command, but a plea. She gave him a single, grateful nod, the unspoken understanding passing between them. Their plan was simple, brutal, and bordering on insane. Artoria, a silver-blue comet, would shoot directly for the central island. Narum would remain on the edge of the Sea of Life, acting as the anvil to her hammer, drawing the full attention of Tiamat's horde. Artoria didn't hesitate. With a surge of mana burst, she leapt from the craft, streaking across the black water. The moment her presence registered, the Sea of Life erupted. From the depths, hundreds, then thousands of Lamu surged upwards. They were more varied here, at the source. Some were the skittering monstrosities from Uruk. Others were winged, bat-like things. Great, serpentine beasts broke the surface, their gaping maws shrieking. It was an army born from a god's nightmare, and it all converged on the single, shining knight flying towards their master. But then, a second sun flared into existence at the edge of the sea. Narum stood on the surface of the black, viscous water, his feet planted as if on solid ground. A faint golden aura of chakra held him aloft. The whisker marks on his cheeks were dark and pronounced. The orange pigmentation of sage mode framing his eyes. He wasn't just sensing the world, he was one with it. He felt the life force of every single Lamu, a chaotic cacophony of malice and hunger. He raised a hand. Behind him, the sky vanished, replaced by an endless, shimmering expanse of golden portals. The gate of Babylon, opened not in hundreds, but in thousands, a celestial armory stretching to the horizon. It was a sight that would have made his father weep with pride, but Narum's intent was different. It wasn't arrogance. It was pest control. All right, you bastards, he said to the oncoming tide of monsters. His voice a low growl that carried across the water. You wanted my attention. You've got it. He brought his hand down. It was not a volley. It was a storm. A biblical cataclysm of steel and divine mystery. Swords, spears, axes, maces, chains, halberds, an unending torrent of noble phantasms, each one a legend in its own right, rained down upon the Sea of Life. The black water churned and boiled as the weapons struck, each impact an explosion of golden light. The front ranks of the Lamu were obliterated, turned to dust and steam before they even knew what hit them. The sheer, overwhelming firepower was breathtaking. He wasn't aiming. He didn't need to. He was simply saturating the entire area, creating a kill zone of impossible lethality. Any monster that tried to get past him to reach Artoria was instantly erased from existence. He had become a fortress, a one-man army holding back the apocalypse. His actions bought Artoria the clear path she needed. She landed on the chitinous island, her gaze fixed on the figure in black armor. Lancelot du Lac. He turned to face her, his movements stiff, puppet-like. The helmet he wore was a monstrous, RNED thing that completely obscured his face, but she could feel the madness radiating from him, the tortured soul trapped within. "Lancelot," she said, her voice echoing in the eerie silence of the island. "It is I, Arthur Pendragon. Release yourself from this corruption. Remember who you are." For a moment, there was a flicker of something in his stance. A hesitation. Then, a shriek of pure, undiluted rage erupted from him. And the red and black aura around him flared violently. Tiamat's control was absolute. He raised his dark sword, Arondite, the unfading light of the lake, now tainted and demonic. He charged. The duel was a tragedy in motion. It was the clash of two people who knew each other's every move, every feint, every breath. Artoria, with her invisible Excalibur, fought with precision and grace. Lancelot, his sanity shattered, fought with a brutal, berserker rage that was a horrifying mockery of his former skill. Their blades met in a shower of sparks, the sound of their clash a scream of sorrow. Artoria was holding back. She parried, she dodged, she defended. She could not bring herself to strike a killing blow against the man who had been her friend. "Fight it, Lancelot," she cried, her voice cracking as she blocked a vicious overhand swing that cratered the ground beneath her. "For the love of God, fight it." His only answer was another enraged roar and a flurry of strikes so fast and powerful they forced her back, her armor groaning under the impacts. His madness gave him strength she could not match with a grieving heart. Meanwhile, Narum's war continued. He was a whirlwind of golden death. He fought with a cold, terrifying efficiency. He didn't just rain weapons from the sky. He used them with the mind of a strategist. He laid down fields of magical mines, summoned great chains to drag down the larger beasts, and used swords with elemental properties to freeze or incinerate entire swaths of the enemy. But the sea was endless. For every 1,000 Lamu he destroyed, 10,000 more emerged. The sea of life itself was his enemy, an infinite factory of monsters. He was a god holding back an ocean, and even a god can tire. The strain was beginning to show. The golden aura around him flickered, and his breathing grew heavier. He was burning through his vast reserves at an alarming rate. He risked a glance towards the island. He could feel the duel, the ebb and flow of the two legendary powers. He felt Artoria's sorrow, her hesitation. And he felt Lancelot's unrelenting, mindless aggression. She was losing. Her grief was a poison, weakening her resolve, making her sloppy. Lancelot broke through her guard, the flat of his demonic blade slamming into her side with enough force to send her flying. She crashed into a pillar of chitin, her armor cracking, a gasp of pain escaping her lips. He stalked towards her, his dark sword raised for the final, brutal execution. Narum saw it. He felt it. He couldn't interfere in their duel. He had given his word. But he had promised to keep the ocean off her back. And Lancelot, in this state, was just another extension of that ocean. He had to bend the rules. He couldn't attack Lancelot, but he could attack the power that controlled him. He closed his eyes, ignoring the horde of monsters crashing against his defenses. He focused his sage mode, reaching out, past the island, past Lancelot. Diving deep into the sea of life, he searched for the spiritual chains that bound the night of the lake to the primordial mother, the puppet strings of divine energy that animated his rage. He found them, a thick, foul cord of purple-black energy that ran from the base of Lancelot's soul deep into the heart of the corrupted sea. Narum didn't have a weapon that could cut a conceptual link like that. But he had something better. He had his own life force. The pure, vibrant chakra of Naruto Uzumaki, the inheritor of the Sage of Six Paths, amplified by the lingering essence of Kurama. Chi was a power of creation and connection, the antithesis of Tiamat's corrupting regression. He gathered that energy, not into a destructive ball, but into a fine, sharp needle of pure, golden light. He took a deep breath, and with a surgeon's precision, across a distance of miles, he severed the cord. On the island, Lancelot froze, his sword arm trembling just inches from Artoria's throat. The overwhelming black and red aura around him sputtered, flickered, and then died, like a flame starved of oxygen. The monstrous helmet retracted with a hiss of steam, revealing the face beneath. It was him, older, his handsome features etched with an eternity of anguish, but it was him. The madness was gone from his purple eyes, replaced by a sudden, heartbreaking lucidity. And shame, my king, he whispered, his voice hoarse, filled with disbelief and horror as he saw her, beaten and wounded at his feet, his own sword raised against her. What have I done? Tears streamed down Artoria's face. Lancelot, he stumbled back, dropping a rondite with a clatter. He looked at his hands, then at the corrupted sea around them, the truth of his enslavement crashing down on him. I failed you. Again, his gaze turned to her, and for the first time in an age, he smiled. It was a faint, sad, but genuine smile. The smile of her old friend. You came for me. I always would, she wept. Thank you, he said softly. He looked down at the dark sword at his feet. He knew the connection to Tiamat was only temporarily severed. She would reassert her control. He would not allow himself to become her puppet again. Grant me this one mercy, my king. A clean end, at your hands. He knelt, bowing his head in submission. The proudest knight of the Round Table, offering his life to his king. Artoria rose, her movements heavy with grief. She picked up her invisible sword, the blade still cloaked in wind. This was the hardest thing she had ever had to do. Harder than Camlan, harder than any battle. She stood before him. Sir Lancelot du Lac, for your loyal service, for your friendship, and for your final, noble act, I grant you peace. Her blade swung. It was swift, merciful, and silent. Lancelot's body glowed, turning into particles of golden light. His last look was one of gratitude and release. He faded away, his spirit finally free, returning to the throne of heroes. Artoria stood alone on the island. The tears flowing freely now, a silent, solitary king mourning her fallen knight. The grief was a physical weight, and she collapsed to her knees, emotionally and spiritually shattered. The moment Lancelot faded, the island began to tremble. With its anchor gone, the entire structure started to destabilize, sinking back into the Black Sea. Worse, the Lamu, no longer held in check by Lancelot's presence, turned their full, undivided attention on the two intruders. The full might of the sea was now aimed at them. Naram felt the shift. He was already exhausted, his defenses crumbling under the endless assault. He couldn't hold them back and get to her. They were about to be overwhelmed. They had won the battle, but lost the war. They couldn't destroy the sea. Its power was too vast, tied to the planet itself. To destroy it with brute force might crack the tectonic plates, poisoning the world's oceans. The moral dilemma hit him with full force. Save the world now, but potentially doom it later. He gritted his teeth. There was no choice. They had to retreat. He unleashed one final, desperate cataclysm from the gate of Babylon, a wave of destructive power that momentarily vaporized everything in a mile-wide radius, buying him a precious few seconds. He shot towards the sinking island, a golden streak across the black water. He reached Artoria as the ground crumbled beneath her knees. She was limp, unresponsive, lost in her grief. He scooped her up into his arms, her body surprisingly light. Hold on, he gritted out, and leapt from the disintegrating island, just as it sank beneath the waves. The Lamu swarmed the space where they had been, their shrieks of frustration echoing across the Dead Sea. Back in the cloaked craft, safe for the moment, Naram laid her gently in the co-pilot's seat. She was conscious, but staring blankly, her eyes seeing a ghost from a bygone era. She was broken. He had won. He had saved her. He had held back an ocean of monsters. But as he looked at the shattered woman beside him and the still spreading sea of death on the viewscreen, it felt like the most profound failure of his life. He had kept his promise. He had bought her the duel she needed. But the cost was a wound to her soul that he didn't know how to heal. And the enemy was still there, stronger than ever, waiting for them. He set a course away from Japan. Away from the horrors of that Black Sea, his mind racing. They had faced the monster. They had faced the politicians. Now, they had to face the consequences. And he had to do it while holding together the one person who had become his partner in this impossible war. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The father and the son. The flight from Japan was a long, suffocating silence. Naram piloted the craft on instinct. His mind a turbulent sea of failure and frustration. The image of the Black Ocean was burned into his thoughts, a pulsating monument to their defeat. Beside him, Artoria was a ghost in a silver-blue dress. She hadn't spoken a word since he'd carried her from the crumbling island. She just stared, her emerald eyes vacant, seeing nothing of the clouds or the sky, but everything of a fresh grave dug in her soul. He could feel her grief, a cold, heavy presence that filled the small cockpit. It was the crushing weight of a crown she no longer wore but could never set down. He tried to speak twice, to offer some word of comfort, but the words felt like ash in his mouth. What could he say? I'm sorry your best friend was turned into a monster and you had to kill him. Platitudes were an insult to the depth of her pain. So he remained silent, his presence a quiet, steady anchor in her storm of sorrow. It was all he could offer. Their retreat was not without consequence. Naram's sage mode, even now, could feel the subtle shift in the world's balance. The destruction of Lancelot, the anchor, had an unforeseen effect. The sea of life, instead of collapsing, was now untethered. It began to slowly, inexorably, expand. There, victory had only worsened the problem. He didn't know where to go. Uruk was compromised. The clock tower knew its location. The Irish cottage was a temporary reprieve at best. They were fugitives with no allies and a rapidly escalating apocalypse on their heels. He felt a familiar exhaustion settle into his bones, the weariness of a war with no end in sight. He was so lost in his thoughts that he almost missed the shift in reality. It wasn't a violent tear like the Lamu fissure, nor a brilliant descent like Artoria's summoning. It was a casual, arrogant distortion, as if the world itself was being peeled back to make way for a superior existence. The air in front of their craft shimmered, not with light, but with gold dust. Space bent, and a golden, ornate throne, impossibly intricate and radiating an aura of absolute authority, materialized directly in their flight path. And seated upon it, one leg crossed over the other, elbow resting on the armrest, chin propped on his hand, was the king of Uruk, Gilgamesh. Naram's blood ran cold. His father had not left the throne room of the ziggurat in 15 years. For him to appear here, in the middle of the sky, meant something had shifted on a cosmic scale. Gilgamesh was exactly as Naram remembered him, a figure of impossible, arrogant perfection. He wore golden armor that seemed to hum with its own power. Every line and curve a declaration of his supremacy. His golden hair was immaculate, his crimson eyes held the cold, calculating light of a distant star, and a faint, contemptuous smirk played on his lips. He was not a man. He was a living monument, the apex of human history looking down upon all his flawed creations. He didn't speak. He simply raised an eyebrow, a silent, damning question. You failed. Naram brought the craft to a halt, the silence in the cockpit suddenly charged with a new, terrifying tension. Even Artoria stirred from her stupor, her senses, dulled by grief, screaming at the sheer, overwhelming presence before them. The power radiating from Gilgamesh was on a completely different scale from anything she had ever felt. It was not the raw, chaotic energy of a beast, nor the ordered power of a grand servant. It was the calm, absolute certainty of a being who owned the very concept of power. Father, Naram said, his voice flat. Gilgamesh's smirk widened. So, the fool returns. His tail between his legs, the king of heroes' voice was not loud, but it filled the space, resonating in their very bones. It was a voice accustomed to being the only one that mattered. I felt the tremor of your failure from my throne. You confronted the problem, and like a witless child swatting at a hornet's nest, you only managed to enrage it. He gestured dismissively at the wounded Artoria. And you have broken your new toy. A saber-class servant, a fine treasure, and you have allowed her spirit to be shattered. You are as wasteful as you are incompetent. A flicker of anger, hot and sharp, cut through Naram's exhaustion. She is not a toy. Everything is a toy to a king. Gilgamesh countered, his voice laced with boredom. Some are simply more amusing than others. She, at least, understood the nature of sacrifice. A concept you seem to struggle with. His crimson gaze swept over Narum, and it was not the look of a father to a son. It was the look of a master craftsman inspecting a flawed tool. I have watched your progress. Your sentimentality, your hesitation. You stood at the precipice of a solution in that black sea, and you faltered. You feared the collateral damage. You worried about cracking the planet. He scoffed, the sound a grating insult. A king does not worry about chipping his chisel when carving his masterpiece. The world is clay, and it is the king's right to mold it. He rose from his throne, the golden construct dissolving behind him as he floated in the open air, a god walking on the sky. Golden ripples, far more numerous and more brilliant than Narum's, opened behind him, a true nebula of divine constructs. Your way has failed, Gilgamesh declared, his voice taking on the tone of final, absolute judgment. Now, we will proceed with mine. The sea of life is a blight, an impurity on my garden. The only solution is to scour it from existence. From the largest portal behind him, the hilt of a weapon began to emerge. It was a bizarre, tripartite cylinder of black and gold, adorned with crimson lines that seemed to throb with a light of their own. It looked less like a sword and more like a key to creation itself. The moment it appeared, the very laws of physics in the surrounding area began to fray at the edges. Artoria, despite her grief, recognized it from the deepest legends of the Throne of Heroes. The Sword of Rupture, the blade that had separated heaven and earth. Ea, she breathed, her voice filled with horrified awe. He intends to use Enuma Elish, Narum stated, his own eyes wide. On the Sea of Life. It is the only logical course of action, Gilgamesh said, his hand closing around the hilt of the great sword. A surgical strike of absolute power. It will erase the corruption, Tiamat's influence, and the surrounding few hundred miles of the Pacific Ocean floor. There will be geological consequences. Tsunamis, earthquakes. The climate may be irrevocably altered. A few mongrels on the coastlines will perish. A small, acceptable price to pay for the preservation of the planet's integrity. The casual, callous dismissal of millions of lives struck Narum like a physical blow. This was the core of their difference. To Gilgamesh, humanity was a flawed, noisy collection he owned. To Narum, they were precious people to be protected. No, Narum said, his voice quiet but firm. Gilgamesh paused, his hand on Ea. What did you say? Narum pushed himself out of the pilot's seat. The craft's canopy dissolved, and he stepped out into the open air, standing on a solid disk of golden light. Facing his father across the clouds. I said no, he repeated, his voice gaining strength, his exhaustion burned away by a sudden, cold clarity. You will not do it. You will not murder millions of innocent people to solve a problem that we can handle. Gilgamesh actually laughed. It was not a sound of mirth. It was a sound of pure, incredulous arrogance. You and your broken knight. You are nothing. You are a child playing with his inheritance. I am the king. My judgment is law. Then your law is wrong. Narum countered, his own power beginning to rise, a golden aura flaring to life around him. The sage mode markings appeared on his face. There's another way, a way to save everyone. I'll find it. Sentiment, Gilgamesh sneered, the word dripping with disdain. He raised Ea, its 3 cylinders beginning to slowly counter-rotate, gathering the very fabric of reality into its core. A howling wind, a prelude to annihilation, whipped around them. You have learned nothing. Your idealism is a flaw, a weakness inherited from your mother. It has no place in a king. I will burn it out of you. I will teach you the true meaning of kingship. Narum's jaw tightened. He knew what was coming. This wasn't a discussion. It was a trial by combat against the oldest and most powerful hero in existence. Artoria, get out of here, he sent through their telepathic link. Take the craft and go. You can't be a part of this. He felt a stir of protest from her, but it was weak, drowned by her grief. He didn't wait for a response. He waved a hand, and the stealth craft's canopy reformed, its engines humming to life. It shot away, a black streak against the clouds, carrying her to safety. Now, it was just father and son, floating miles above the earth. So, the whelp has fangs. Gilgamesh mused, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He was not angry. He was intrigued, entertained. You would stand against your king. Against your father. I would stand against anyone who threatens my people. Naram declared. And right now, that's you. Then perish with them in your folly. Gilgamesh roared, and the battle began. It was not a battle. It was a hurricane. Gilgamesh didn't even bother with his lesser treasures. 1,000 portals opened, and from them launched 1,000 noble phantasms, all of them legendary, all of them aimed to kill. Swords that could cleave mountains. Spears that never missed, axes that shattered dimensions. It was a storm of pure, conceptual power. Naram was not his father. He couldn't match the sheer volume. He didn't try. He became a leaf in the wind. A master of avoidance and redirection. His sage mode was pushed to its absolute limit, not just predicting the trajectory of the weapons, but the intent behind their summoning. He weaved through the storm. A golden blur of motion. A spear that inflicted wounds that could never heal shot towards him. He didn't block it. He summoned a simple, unnamed shield from his own gate, not to stop the spear, but to angle his deflection, sending it careening into a sword that froze everything it touched. The two conceptual weapons annihilated each other in a flash of light. He was not fighting the weapons. He was fighting the symphony, turning his father's own notes against each other. It was a display of combat genius, of pure skill against overwhelming power, that left Gilgamesh momentarily stunned. You fight like a rat in a granary. The king of heroes bellowed, frustration coloring his tone for the first time. And you fight like a rich man throwing gold at a problem. Naram shot back, summoning a dozen shadow clones who instantly spread out, each one a new target, each one using the same evasive, brilliant tactics. Gilgamesh's frustration turned to fury. This was an insult. His son was not even trying to match his power. He was mocking it, treating his ultimate treasury like a child's tantrum to be weathered. Enough. The 1,000 portals vanished. The storm ceased. Gilgamesh raised Ea, its cylinders now spinning at a dizzying speed. The sky darkened. Red, vein-like cracks spread across the heavens as space-time itself began to break down. The pressure was immense, a gravity well of pure annihilation that threatened to crush Naram's very soul. You have proven you have the skill of a jester, Gilgamesh said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. Now, witness the power of a true king. A power that renders all skill, all strategy, meaningless. Let the maelstrom of creation sing your demise. Enuma Elish. He swung the sword. It did not fire a beam. It did not create an explosion. It unleashed reality, a torrent of crimson and black energy, a vision of the primordial chaos before the world had a name, erupted from the blade. It was not an attack that destroyed. It was an anti-creation event that unmade whatever it touched, returning it to the nothingness from which it came. Naram's clones were erased from existence instantly. The air, the clouds, the very light itself was being devoured by the oncoming wave of oblivion. He knew he couldn't block it. Aya's would be unmade. His strongest shield would last a nanosecond. He couldn't dodge it. The attack was not merely moving through space, it was consuming space itself. He had one chance, one insane, desperate gambit. Not to defeat it, but to endure it. His hands flew through a series of seals. Faster than the eye could see. The golden aura of sage mode around him deepened, becoming almost solid. He drew upon every last drop of his own vast power, but it wasn't enough. He reached deeper, to the second sea of power within him, the one that had been dormant for so long. He reached for the echo of the fox. For the first time since his reincarnation, he let the gates open. A colossal, incandescent orange energy, teeming with so much life force it felt like a star being born, erupted from him. It took the shape of a skeletal frame, a ribcage and a monstrous, nine-tailed fox skull. Surrounding him like a suit of divine armor. The lingering will of Kurama, his oldest and truest friend, answered his call. It was not the full beast. It was just an echo, a memory of power. But it was enough. He poured everything, his mana, his chakra, Kurama's echo, into one single, desperate defense. It was not a shield from his gate. It was a technique from his soul. A Rasengan. But it was a Rasengan unlike any he had ever created. It was a sphere of raging, golden energy, infused with the vibrant orange of the fox's power, and contained within it was the very essence of natural energy drawn from the entire planet. A sage art. Massive Rasengan. He didn't throw it. He met the Enuma Elish head-on, pushing his technique into the heart of the anti-creation wave. The two ultimate attacks collided. There was no sound. There was only light. The world vanished in a silent, blinding flash of white. It was the collision of the beginning and the end, the song of creation against the roar of uncreation. For a single, eternal moment, Naram's Rasengan held. It did not stop the Enuma Elish. It couldn't, but it created a tiny, infinitesimal island of reality in the center of the unmaking storm. It was the stubborn, unrelenting will of Naruto Uzumaki, the man who would never give up, refusing to be erased. Then, it broke. The wave of Enuma Elish washed over him. The Kurama avatar shattered. His own power was stripped away. The pain was absolute, a feeling of being unmade atom by atom. But he endured. When the light faded, the sky was clear. The storm was gone. Gilgamesh stood, breathing heavily, Ea silent in his hand. And across from him, Naram still floated. His clothes were gone, vaporized. His body was a canvas of horrific, blistering burns. Blood streamed from his nose and mouth. He was shaking uncontrollably, his life force almost completely extinguished. But he was alive, and his crimson eyes, though bloodshot and weary, were still burning with defiance. He had faced the ultimate noble phantasm, the pinnacle of all power, and he had survived. Not through an equal power, but through sheer, impossible, stubborn will. Gilgamesh stared, his arrogant smirk gone, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. It was impossible. Nothing survived Enuma Elish. Nothing. Yet his son, his flawed, sentimental, foolish son, had. He hadn't won. He hadn't even fought back. He had simply refused to die. For the first time in millennia, the King of Heroes was speechless. He saw in his son's bleeding, broken form not weakness, not sentimentality, but a strength he could not comprehend. A strength of will so absolute it could stare into the abyss of non-existence and not blink. It was not the strength of a king who ruled from above. It was the strength of a pillar that held the world up from below. With a motion that felt strangely weary, Gilgamesh lowered Ea. The great sword dissolved into golden dust. He looked at his son, truly looked at him, and for a fleeting moment, the king was gone. And only a father remained. A single, small golden portal opened beside Gilgamesh's hand. From it, he retrieved not a weapon, but a small, unassuming key. It was made of plain, dark iron, intricately carved with cuneiform script. It hummed with a quiet, ancient power. He tossed it. The key tumbled through the air, and Naram, with the last of his strength, caught it. "You are a fool," Gilgamesh said, his voice devoid of its earlier arrogance, replaced by a strange, hollow tone. A stubborn, sentimental fool. He turned away, his back to his broken son. "But you are no coward." A golden portal opened behind him, a gateway back to his throne room. "Prove it," Gilgamesh said, without looking back. "Prove your way is not the path that leads to ruin. Prove His strength of the pillar is greater than the decree of the king." And with that, he stepped through the portal and was gone. Naram was left floating alone in the empty sky, the iron key clutched in his bleeding hand. His strength gave out, and he began to fall. The world faded to black. He awoke to the scent of salt and the soft, cool touch of a damp cloth on his forehead. He was back in the Irish cottage, lying in a simple bed. The burns were gone, his skin miraculously healed, though his entire body ached with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The echo of Kurama's power, having saved him, had receded into dormancy, leaving his own reserves terrifyingly empty. He turned his head. Artoria was sitting in a chair by the bedside, the cloth in her hand. Her eyes were no longer vacant. The deep well of grief was still there. But beneath it, a new light was kindling. A fierce, protective fire. She had seen it. She had felt the battle, even from a distance. She had felt him stand against a god for his ideals. "You're an idiot," she said, her voice soft but laced with an emotion he couldn't quite place. It sounded like anger, but it felt like reverence. "Heard that before," Naram rasped, his throat raw. He tried to sit up. And she was instantly there, helping him, her touch gentle but firm. "I saw it," she said, her gaze locked on him. The power he wielded, it was beyond comprehension. "And you faced it. You didn't run. Running wasn't an option, he said, wincing. No, she agreed. It wasn't. Not for you. She looked at him, at this man who had faced down his own father, a living god, not for power or for glory, but for a principle, for the lives of strangers. He hadn't just protected her, he had shown her a new kind of kingship. Not one of lonely, self-sacrificial duty, but one of defiant, unyielding protection. A king who was willing to be a shield, not just a sword. In that moment, she saw him not as a prince, not as a powerhouse, not as a fusion of strange abilities. She saw Narum, and in the quiet aftermath of a battle that had almost unmade the world, a new, fragile, but powerful bond began to form, forged in the fires of Enuma Elish. He had lost the battle with his father, been beaten to within an inch of his life. But as he looked at the renewed strength in Artoria's eyes, a strength he had given back to her by his example, he realized he had won something far more important. He had won an ally who now believed in his way. Completely. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The unlikely vanguard. The 2 weeks that followed the confrontation with Gilgamesh were a quiet, tense period of healing. The Irish cottage became their sanctuary and their war room. Narum's body recovered with the unnatural vitality gifted by his Uzumaki heritage and Kurama's lingering echo. But his energy reserves were dangerously low. The act of enduring Enuma Elish had nearly burned out his very soul. He spent most of his days in a deep meditative state, slowly, painstakingly drawing natural energy from the wind and the sea, coaxing his depleted core back to life. Artoria, in turn, found her own way to heal. The shock of Narum's defiance had been a bucket of ice water to her grief-stricken soul. It hadn't erased the pain of Lancelot's death, but it had contextualized it. She saw now that her path of solitary sacrifice was a path to ruin, for herself and those around her. Narum's way, stubborn, reckless, and built on a foundation of protecting everyone, offered a different possibility. She became his guardian. While he meditated, she stood watch, her senses sharp, her hand never far from the hilt of her invisible sword. She maintained the cottage's bounded fields, foraged for food in the nearby village, and studied the holographic map Narum had left active, her mind, clear and sharp once more. Analyzing Tiamat's movements, the sea of life was expanding. Slowly, but with a horrifying certainty. It was now a blight on the globe, visible even to mundane satellites which governments were scrambling to explain as an unprecedented algal bloom. The clock tower was silent, no doubt reeling from their escape and Valerius's bruised ego. They were a threat in the shadows, waiting. It's not enough, Artoria said one evening, breaking the comfortable silence. They were seated by the hearth, the peat fire casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Narum was finally looking like himself again, the deep-seated exhaustion fading from his eyes. I know, he replied, staring into the flames. Even at full strength, the two of us can't hold back the tide. Deal with the clock tower at the same time. We're treating the symptoms, but the disease is winning. We need a new strategy. We need more than a strategy, she countered, her tone decisive. We need allies. Narum looked at her, a slow grin spreading across his face. I was hoping you'd say that. Fighting alone is a good way to die alone. He flexed his hands, feeling the familiar thrum of power returning. But who would be crazy enough to stand with us? We have a primordial goddess on one side, the entire Mages Association on the other, and my father, well, let's just call him a neutral disaster zone. There are others, Artoria insisted, powerful forces in the world that operate outside the clock tower's authority. Those who value the old ways, or who simply do not wish to see the world dissolved into primordial ooze. Remnants of the age of gods, rogue servants, magi who hold to different principles. Recruitment, Narum mused, the idea taking root. It felt right. It felt something Naruto Uzumaki would do, build a team, forge bonds, create a family to fight with. All right, but we can't just put out an ad. We need people who are powerful, trustworthy, and independent. And we need them yesterday. He closed his eyes, his sage mode gently reaching out, not with force, but as a subtle probe, sifting through the flows of magical energy across the globe. He was looking for anomalies. Concentrations of power that didn't fit the structured patterns of the clock tower or the chaotic filth of Tiamat. His mind's eye swept over the world. He felt the cold, ancient power of the vampire ancestors sleeping in the earth. He felt the hum of dragon lines deep beneath the mountains of Asia. Most were either too alien, too hostile, or too deeply asleep to be of use. But then he found two distinct, powerful, and, most importantly, active signatures. He opened his eyes, a glint of excitement in them. I've got two potential candidates. One is a group, hidden deep in the Swiss Alps. They feel old, elemental. Their energy is like a blizzard, clean and cold and powerful. The other is a single individual. In Greece, the signature is familiar, a heroic spirit. But he's not a berserker, not corrupted. He feels bored, like a lion in a zoo. Then those are our targets, Artoria said, rising to her feet, her own energy surging with renewed purpose. Where first? The blizzard, Narum said. A group is a bigger gamble, but a bigger reward. If they say yes, we get an army. If they say no, well, let's hope they say no politely. The Swiss Alps were a breathtaking vista of jagged, snow-capped peaks and pristine blue skies. Narum's craft, cloaked and silent, navigated the treacherous mountain passes with ease. The place he had sensed was not a castle or a fortress, but a place that shouldn't exist. A valley nestled between three of the highest peaks, hidden from the world by a perpetual, localized blizzard of magical energy. To any outsider, it was just another impassable storm. But to Narum's senses, it was a gateway. He landed the craft in a sheltered ice cave. The moment they stepped out, the air, thin and bitingly cold, crackled with power. They know we're here, Artoria stated. Her breath misting. She was back in her full armor, a bastion of silver blue against the blinding white snow. Good, Narum said, pulling the collar of his simple black coat tighter. Saves us knocking. They walked into the heart of the storm. The wind howled, and shards of ice sharp as glass whipped around them, but a thin, golden aura of chakra shimmered around Narum, deflecting the worst of it. Artoria simply walked through it, her magic resistance rendering the magical storm little more than a stiff breeze. As they reached the center of the valley, the blizzard parted, the wind falling silent. They stood in a serene, hidden vale where the snow was untouched. Before them stood a village that seemed to be carved from the living ice of the glacier itself. Buildings glowed with a soft, internal light, and the air hummed with a power so pure it felt like the mountain's own soul. A group of figures emerged from the largest structure. They were tall, pale, skinned people with hair as white as snow and eyes the color of glacial ice. They wore robes of woven frost and carried staves of polished, clear ice. They were not human, not entirely. They were something older, descendants of a forgotten winter god. One woman stepped forward. She was ancient, her face a roadmap of 1,000 winters, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent, and the power she radiated dwarfed all the others. She was the clan's matriarch. Outsiders, she said, her voice like the cracking of a glacier. A demigod of Mesopotamia and a knight of Britain. You are far from your homes and tread on sacred ground. The world must be in a sorry state indeed. It is, Narum replied simply, stepping forward. My name is Narum. This is Saber. We've come to ask for your help. The matriarch, whose name was Lyra, regarded him with a cool, appraising gaze. We are the children of Boreas. We have remained hidden since the fading of our father's age. We have no interest in the squabbles of humanity. This isn't a squabble, Narum said, his tone serious. It's an extinction. Tiamat has returned. She is poisoning the world, turning it back into a primordial sea. Your mountain, your sacred valley, it will not be spared. She will drown it in mud, and your winter will be silenced forever. A murmur went through the other clan members. They had felt the wrongness in the world, the slow sickening of the planet's life force. Lyra was unmoved. Even so, why should we ally with you? You are a creature of the sun and sand, a child of a desert king. Your very nature is antithetical to ours. Your power is hot and loud. Ours is cold and silent. Because I'm the only one with a plan to fight back, Narum stated. And because a blizzard and a wildfire fighting together are more effective than either one alone. Lyra studied him for a long moment. Words are wind. Your legend, demigod, is non-existent. Your companion is a hero of renown, but you are an unknown quantity. If you wish for the aid of the children of Boreas, you must prove your worth. You must undergo the trial of the soul winter. What is it? Artoria asked, her hand on her sword, suspecting a trap. It is simple, Lyra said, a faint, cold smile touching her lips. She gestured to the vast, open snowfield at the center of the valley. You will stand in the heart of our power. We will unleash a blizzard of pure magical energy, the very essence of our winter. It will not freeze your body, but your spiritual core. It will strip away all heat, all motion, all life, until only the truth of your soul remains. If your will is strong enough to endure it, you will have our respect. She paused, her gaze hardening. But that is only the first part. While your soul is being frozen, you must solve a riddle that has plagued our people for a generation. The Gilgamesh cube, a strategic puzzle created by a mad magus who strayed here long ago. It has 1,000 configurations and only one solution. It was an impossible trial. To withstand a direct spiritual assault while simultaneously solving a hyper-complex strategic puzzle. They expected him to fail. This wasn't a test. It was a polite, but deadly, way of saying no. Artoria stepped forward. This is absurd. No one could. Narum put a hand on her shoulder, stopping her. He looked at Lyra, a determined glint in his crimson eyes. I accept. He walked to the center of the snowfield, shrugging off his coat, leaving him in just his black tunic. He sat down, crossed his legs, and closed his eyes. Lyra nodded to her clan. They raised their ice staves. The air temperature plummeted. A storm of blue-white energy, far more intense than the outer blizzard, erupted from them, converging on Narum in a swirling vortex of absolute cold. It wasn't physical cold. It was a conceptual winter that bypassed his chakra aura and attacked his spiritual core directly. It sought to slow his thoughts, freeze his will, and extinguish the fire of his life force. Simultaneously, a complex, multifaceted cube of shimmering ice materialized in the air in front of him. It was covered in shifting runes and panels, a nightmare of logic and spatial reasoning. Artoria watched, her heart in her throat. She could feel the sheer oppressive power of the blizzard, an existential cold that made her own soul ache even from a distance. Narum sat motionless, a statue of black, and gold in the heart of the blue-white storm. He had to be in agony. But Narum was not in agony. He was in his element. The soul winter was terrifying, but he had faced worse. He had faced the crushing loneliness of a village's hatred. He had stared down the abyss of Enuma Elish. This cold was just another pressure. He met it not with his own fire, but with stillness. He allowed the cold to wash over him, but he held on to a single, unshakable point of warmth in his core. The memory of ramen broth, the feeling of a hand on his shoulder, the faces of his friends, the determined gaze of the night watching over him. His will was not a bonfire to be extinguished. It was a geothermal vent, a quiet, inexhaustible heat from the core of his soul. While his spirit held the line, his mind, sharpened to a razor's edge by sage mode, focused on the cube. He didn't see it as a puzzle of logic. He saw it as a flow of energy. He could feel the pathways within it, the connections, the dead ends. The runes and panels were a distraction. The true solution lay in the current of magic that powered it. He didn't move a muscle. He didn't speak. But in his mind's eye, he was turning the cube, testing pathways. Feeling for the one true channel. He wasn't solving it, he was sensing the solution. It was an unorthodox, intuitive leap that no purely logical mind could have made. Minutes stretched into an hour. The children of Boreas began to strain, their own energy reserves starting to wane. The blizzard they had unleashed was immense, yet the man at its center had not moved, had not even shivered. Then, Narum spoke, his voice clear and calm, cutting through the howling of the storm. The bottom left panel, turn it counterclockwise. Then the top right, push it in. The central rune on the FA. Side needs to be fed a spark of your own energy, to complete the circuit. It's not a lock, it's a capacitor. It was never meant to be opened. It was meant to be charged. There was a stunned silence. Lyra stared at the cube. Then at Narum. She slowly approached the puzzle, her hand tracing the panels he had indicated. She followed his instructions, with a final touch of her own energy to the central rune. The Gilgamesh cube flared with brilliant light, its 1,000 facets locking into place with a definitive, harmonious click. It was solved. The blizzard ceased. The children of Boreas stared, their staves lowered. Their expressions a mixture of shock and profound respect. He had not only endured their ultimate trial, he had solved their unsolvable riddle without even touching it. Naram opened his eyes, a thin layer of frost covering his eyelashes. He rose to his feet, a small smile on his face. So, about that alliance. Lyra bowed her head, a gesture of immense significance. The children of Boreas will follow you. Sun Prince, your will is a winter unto itself. 2 days later, they were in Greece. The second anomaly was located on a small, sun-drenched island in the Aegean, notable only for its ancient, crumbling ruins and the startling number of goats. In the center of the island, blazing in the sun on a fallen marble column, was a man of immense physical presence. He was tall, powerfully built, with fiery red hair and a confident, almost lazy grin. He wore a simple tunic and sandals, but the power radiating from him was unmistakable. It was the blazing, charismatic son of a rider-class servant. Iskander, the king of conquerors. He wasn't a proper servant, summoned for a Grail war. As Naram's senses parsed the data, he realized Iskander was an echo, a fragment of his full self anchored to the world by the lingering devotion of his old master, Waver Velvet, now Lord El Meloy II. He was a phantom enjoying a long, sun-drenched retirement. As Naram and Artoria approached, Iskander opened one eye. Ho, visitors. And what an impressive pair. The famous king of knights, looking as stern as ever, and, you. His gaze fell on Naram, and his grin widened. I can't quite place you, boy. But you reek of divinity and trouble. I like it. What brings you to my little paradise? King of conquerors, Artoria greeted him with a respectful nod. We have come on an urgent matter. Urgent matters are for the living, Iskander chuckled, stretching languidly like a great lion. I am but a ghost enjoying the view. The world can sort out its own troubles. The world is about to be dissolved, Naram said. Cutting to the chase. Tiamat, Beast 2, I'm putting together a team to stop her. We need your help. Iskander sat up, his expression finally turning serious. Tiamat, you say, the old mother. Now that is a foe worthy of a song. A conquest to shake the heavens. His eyes gleamed with excitement. But then, the fire died down, and he sighed, slumping back down. Alas, it is not my war to fight. I am a shadow, my boy. My legend is past. This era belongs to you. A legend is never past as long as people remember it, Naram countered. He took a step forward, his eyes locking with Iskander's. You were the king of conquerors. You rode at the head of an army that shared your dream. You showed them a vision of Oceanus, a goal to strive for. You didn't conquer lands. You conquered hearts. Iskander looked at him, surprised by the boy's insight. This is not just another war, Naram continued, his voice ringing with passion. This is a battle for the very idea of moving forward. Tiamat wants to drag humanity back to the primordial mud, to erase every dream, every achievement, every song. She is the ultimate enemy of progress. The ultimate enemy of conquest. He gestured to the vast, blue sea. Your Oceanus. She wants to turn it into a black, dead thing. Are you going to sit here and let her? Iskander was silent, the lazy grin gone, replaced by a thoughtful frown. The boy's words had struck a deep, resonant chord. A fine speech, he finally boomed, slapping his knee. You have the heart of a king, boy. But an army cannot follow a king with no dream of his own. I followed my dream to the edge of the world. What is your dream? What vision do you show your followers? It was the ultimate question. What did he fight for? Naram didn't hesitate. I dream of a world where everyone can go home at the end of the day. Where they can sit at a table and share a meal with the people they love. Where a king doesn't sit on a throne looking down, but stands with his people. Protecting their right to laugh, to cry, to dream their own dreams. He looked Iskander square in the eye. My dream is a world full of precious people, and I will tear down any or monster that tries to take that away. That is my conquest. It was not a grand vision of glory or empire. It was a simple, heartfelt, and deeply human dream. It was the dream of Naruto Uzumaki. Iskander stared at him, and then he began to laugh. It was a deep, booming, infectious laugh that echoed across the ruins. Ha, ha 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 ha, wonderful, absolutely wonderful, not a conquest of land, but a conquest of peace. A dream worthy of a true king. He leapt to his feet, his immense presence flaring to life. Very well, Naram of Uruk. Your dream is a grand one. It is a dream I would gladly ride alongside. He slammed a fist over his heart. I, Iskander, king of conquerors, pledge my sword and my chariot to your cause. Show me this conquest of yours. Naram grinned. He had gained another powerful, unlikely ally. He now had the silent, cold power of winter and the boisterous, fiery heart of conquest at his back. They were no longer just two fugitives. They were the beginning of an army. A vanguard. But as they stood on that sun-drenched shore, a small, dark thought nagged at the back of Naram's mind. A subplot in the grand play of the world. He subtly looked north, towards London. He could feel the cold, calculating presence of Lord Valerius, and something new. Something was being forged in the depths of the clock tower, a power specifically designed to counter him. Valerius had lost the first skirmish. But he was not a man to give up. He was building a weapon. And Naram knew, with a chilling certainty, that the next time they met the clock tower, it wouldn't be a test. It would be an execution. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Serpent's Kiss. The vanguard was born not in a throne room but in the belly of Naram's silent, speeding craft. It was an alliance forged in the thin air between continents. A motley collection of impossible beings united by a single, defiant purpose. Lyra, the matriarch of the children of Boreas, had sent her two most powerful warriors, a stoic, silent man named Kale who could shape glaciers with a gesture, and his sister, Aera, a stormcrafter whose laughter sounded like wind chimes. They were the embodiment of controlled, silent power. Iskander, by contrast, was a whirlwind of boisterous energy that filled the entire craft. He had examined every corner of the vessel, peppering Naram with 1,000 questions about its design, its propulsion, and whether it could be fitted with scythed chariot wheels. His presence was a constant, booming reassurance, a bonfire of charisma that warmed even the cold children of Boreas. Their first council of war was held around the holographic globe, the pulsing black soar of Tiamat's sea of life a grim centerpiece. She grows bolder. Lyra's voice echoed from a communication crystal Naram had linked to the craft's systems. From her valley, she could feel the planet's fever worsening. The corruption spreads from a new nexus. In the heart of Europe. The ancient forest on the German border. The Schwarzwald. The Black Forest. Artoria murmured, her brow furrowed. A place of old tales and powerful ley lines. If she establishes a permanent foothold there, she could cripple the continent's entire magical network. A fortress. Then, Iskander boomed, slamming a fist on the console, making the ice warriors flinch. A challenge worthy of our first ride. We will charge in, crush this new nest, and raise a victory monument of Lamu skulls. A direct assault is what they will expect, Kale, the glacier shaper, said, his voice a low rumble like shifting ice. It was the first time he had spoken in hours. The enemy is not a mindless beast. It learns. The quiet one is right, Naram agreed, zooming the map in on the Black Forest. It was a sea of dark green, now marred by a spiderweb of purple corruption spreading from its heart. We've fought them in a city and on the open ocean. They've seen our tactics. Artoria's charge, my gate, your elemental power, they'll have countermeasures. Then we shall do what they don't expect, Iskander declared. Exactly, Naram said, a predatory grin touching his lips. We won't just attack the nest. We'll use their own strategy against them. We're going to set a trap. The plan he laid out was audacious. The Schwarzwald nexus was being anchored by a cluster of powerful bio-magical trees that were pumping Tiamat's corruption into the ley lines. The vanguard wouldn't just storm the grove. They would split into 3 teams. Team 1, led by Iskander, would be the glorious, noisy distraction. He and his chariot, pulled by his phantom Gordian sparks, would charge the eastern flank of the forest, a thunderous assault of lightning and steel designed to draw the bulk of the Lamu horde. Team 2, Kale and Aera, would be the silent lockdown. They would approach from the north, not to fight, but to use their immense elemental power to freeze the very ground, creating a barrier of permafrost and ice walls to box the Lamu in, preventing their escape or reinforcement. Team 3, the tip of the spear, would be Naram and Artoria. While the horde was distracted and contained, they would use the stealth capabilities of Naram's craft to land undetected in the eye of the storm, at the corrupted grove itself. Their mission: destroy the anchor trees before the enemy even realized the true attack had begun. It was a classic shinobi strategy: misdirection, containment, and a swift, decisive strike at the heart. It was a plan that relied on speed, trust, and perfect coordination. As they flew towards Germany, the mood in the craft was electric with anticipation. Iskander was polishing his gladius, humming a hearty marching tune. Kale and Aira were meditating, their power coalescing into a palpable aura of cold. Artoria stood beside Narum, her hand resting on the hilt of her now visible Excalibur. She had decided, after their talk in Ireland, that she would no longer hide behind the wind. She would face this war as herself, Arthur Pendragon, King of Knights. Her presence was a calm, steady counterpoint to Iskander's fire and the Borean's ice. "You're quiet," she observed, looking at Narum. "Just thinking," he replied, his gaze on the sensor readings. "It feels too easy. Tiamat's forces have adapted before. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. We have accounted for every variable," she reassured him, her confidence in his plan absolute. "The strategy is sound. Strategies are just guesses with fancy diagrams," he murmured. "It's the things you can't account for that get you killed." The Black Forest was a nightmare. The ancient, towering pines were twisted into grotesque shapes, their needles replaced by weeping black sludge. A foul purple mist clung to the forest floor, and the air was filled with the chittering, screeching sounds of thousands of lamu. In the center of the forest, a clearing had been carved out, and in it stood 5 colossal, pulsating trees of pale flesh and chitin, their roots burrowing deep into the earth, vomiting corruption into the ley lines. The attack began with a thunderclap that shook the heavens. "Behold, you foul spawn of mud! The army of the King of Conquerors is upon you." Iskander's voice, magically amplified, boomed across the forest. His reality marble, Yonioi Heteroi, was too much to manifest fully, but he brought forth its spirit. His divine chariot, pulled by 2 crackling beasts of pure lightning, descended from the sky like a meteor. He was a one-man cavalry charge, a whirlwind of bronze and thunder, plowing through the eastern flank of the Lamu horde. The monsters, drawn by the raw power and the sheer, glorious noise, turned to face him in a massive, screeching wave. Phase 1 was a success. Simultaneously, on the northern edge, a blizzard erupted. It was not the chaotic storm of the Alps, but a controlled, advancing wall of absolute zero. Kale strode at its heart, his hands outstretched, the very ground freezing solid 10 feet deep beneath his feet. Aira danced around him, weaving curtains of razor-sharp wind and ice shards that hurted the Lamu, preventing them from flanking Iskander and pushing them back into the trap. The Force became a killing box of lightning and ice. Phase 2 was in motion. "That's our cue," Narum said. Their craft, cloaked and utterly silent, slipped through the chaos, landing softly in a thicket just 100 yards from the corrupted grove. The air here was thick with foul energy, and the 5 trees pulsed with a sickening, rhythmic beat, like 5 monstrous hearts. Guarding them was a contingent of elite Lamu, bigger, more heavily armored, and disturbingly intelligent looking. Narum and Artoria leapt from the craft, their weapons ready. There was no need for words. They moved as one. Artoria was a flash of silver and gold. She met the elite guards head-on, Excalibur a brilliant arc of holy light in the gloomy forest. She was no longer the hesitant, breathing woman from the sea of life. She was the wielder of the holy sword, a paragon of knightly perfection, her every strike a masterpiece of economy and power. Narum was her shadow, her support. He didn't unleash his big attacks. He was a scalpel. A golden portal would open, and a chain would lash out to trip a charging Lamu. Another would produce a small, sharp blade to sever a limb. He used his gate of Babylon with the quiet lethality of an assassin, creating openings, covering Artoria's flanks, ensuring she could focus her overwhelming power without distraction. They were a perfect engine of destruction, a seamless fusion of direct force and subtle tactics. In minutes, the elite guards were nothing but dissolving piles of ichor and mud. The 5 pulsating trees stood before them, undefended. "Together," Artoria called, raising Excalibur. Narum nodded, his hands coming together as a massive, churning sphere of golden energy formed between them. A giant Rasengan. They were about to unleash the final, decisive blow. They had won. It had been flawless. And that's when the other shoe dropped. It came not from the forest, but from the sky. 6 pinpricks of light, descending at incredible speed. They were not Lamu. They were sleek, sharp, and metallic. They looked like javelins, but they hummed with a cold, precise magical energy that Naram recognized instantly. The clock tower. Incoming. He roared, aborting his attack. He shoved Artoria hard, pushing her out of the way. The 6 javelins slammed into the ground around him, burying themselves deep in the earth. They didn't explode. Instead, a wave of gray, chilling energy erupted from them, forming a perfect hexagonal prison of shimmering force. Naram was trapped inside. He slammed a fist against the barrier. It felt solid as diamond, but it was the energy it emitted that was the true threat. A debilitating, nullifying field. His connection to his gate of Babylon sputtered, the golden ripples flickering and dying. The divine half of his nature was being suppressed, choked off. On a ridge overlooking the forest, hidden by a powerful illusion, Lord Valerius Bartholomew watched the scene unfold in a floating scrying mirror. Beside him stood Kalen, clad in new, black combat gear. A cruel smile on his face. "The divine binders are a success, my lord," Kalen reported, his voice filled with pride. Forged with the authority of Gorgon's eye, they impose the concept of stasis upon any divine entity within their field. He is cut off from his primary power source. Excellent, Valerius murmured, his cold eyes fixed on the trapped Naram. Phase 1 of our plan is complete. Now, begin Phase 2, show him the futility of his resistance. Back in the clearing, Artoria scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with fury. Naram. She charged the barrier, slamming Excalibur against it. The holy sword, a weapon that could level fortresses, bounced off with a screech of protesting energy, creating a ripple of gray light but leaving no mark. "It's no good," Naram yelled from inside, his voice strained. "It's designed for me. It nullifies divinity. Your sword's holy attribute is probably just feeding it." Before Artoria could strike again, a new threat emerged from the trees. A squad of 10 figures, moving with the silent, deadly precision of elite soldiers. They were the Clock Tower's anti-deity task force. Kalen was at their head, a long, black spear held loosely in his hand. The tip of the spear glowed with the same sickly gray light as the prison. "King of Knights," Kalen greeted her, his voice dripping with condescending formality. "Our quarrel is not with you. It is with the anomaly. Stand aside, and Elia will not have to find a replacement." Artoria's response was a furious battle cry. She charged, a blur of righteous anger. But these were not mindless golems. They were the Clock Tower's finest enforcers, equipped and trained for one purpose, to kill beings like Naram. And Artoria, a divine spirit of the highest order, was just as vulnerable. They engaged her, not in a duel, but a coordinated hunt. 2 enforcers deployed shields that flared with the same gray energy, catching her blade, the impact sending a jarring shock up her arms. 3 more laid down complex curse fields, layers of spells designed to slow her, to drain her mana, to cloud her senses. Kalen and the others harassed her with weapons laced with the same divine binding properties. They weren't trying to kill her quickly. They were trying to wear her down, to capture her. It was a 3-ring circus of chaos. In the east, Iskander was still Joyf, Yuli battling the bulk of the Lamu horde, completely unaware of the betrayal. In the north, the children of Boreas were maintaining their ice wall, their duty fulfilled. And in the center, Artoria was fighting for her life against a specialized kill squad, while Naram was trapped, helpless, in a cage that was slowly strangling his very essence. He watched, his fists clenched, a furious impotence building in his chest. He still had his chakra. He still had his sage mode. But without the versatility of the gate, he was a brawler, not a one-man army. He punched the wall again, a futile gesture of rage. Kalen saw his opportunity. While his team kept Artoria occupied, he broke from the fight, his movements impossibly fast. He spun, his black spear a blur, and hurled it with all his might. It was not aimed at Artoria. It was aimed at Naram. The spear passed through the gray barrier as if it wasn't there, the trap programmed to allow their own weapons through. It flew, a streak of black and gray, aimed directly for Naram's heart. Time seemed to slow down. Artoria saw it. She screamed his name, trying to break free from the enforcers bogging her down. Naram saw it, his sage mode predicting the trajectory, but his body, weakened by the field, couldn't move fast enough to dodge completely. He twisted, a desperate, last-second evasion. The spear missed his heart. But it did not miss him. The binder-laced tip tore through his right shoulder, punching clean through muscle and bone. The pain was excruciating, a searing, physical agony. But that was not the worst of it. The moment it made contact, the gray energy exploded through his system. It wasn't just a wound, it was a poison to his very spiritual core. It attacked his chakra pathways, his magical circuits, his connection to natural energy. It felt like his soul was being filled with concrete. He cried out, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony, and collapsed to his knees, the black spear sticking out of his shoulder like a grotesque flagpole. His sage mode sputtered and died. The world, which had been a vibrant tapestry of life force, snapped back to dull, flat reality. He was blind. He was weak. The triumphant smirk on Kalen's face was the last thing he saw clearly. The sight of him falling, the sound of his cry, it broke something in Artoria. The disciplined control, the knightly restraint, the kingly demeanor, it all shattered. All that was left was a furious, protective rage. She let out a roar. It was not the cry of a king or a knight. It was the roar of a dragon protecting its hoard. An explosion of golden mana erupted from her. So violent and so powerful it sent the enforcers staggering back. It was not her controlled, elegant mana burst. It was a raw, untamed torrent of pure, unadulterated power. Her armor, her very being, blazed with a light that was almost blinding. The grief, the frustration, the rage at the betrayal, her terror at seeing Narum fall, all of it was being channeled into one, single purpose. You will not touch him, she screamed, her voice distorted by the sheer volume of energy she was channeling. Kalen and his team stared in shock. Their sensors were screaming, overloading. The power she was now emitting was magnitudes beyond anything a normal saber-class servant should be capable of. This was the power of the Red Dragon, the spirit of Britain itself, awakened by pure, primal fury. She raised Excalibur high. The blade, already a beacon of holy light, began to shine with an intensity that dwarfed the sun. But she wasn't gathering energy for a beam. She was gathering it into the blade itself. Valerius, watching from his ridge, leapt to his feet. What is she doing? That's not how Excalibur is supposed to function. Get them out of there, Kalen. Retreat. But it was too late. Artoria brought the sword down. She did not swing it at a target. She slammed the flat of the blade against the ground. The result was not a beam or an explosion. It was an unrestrained, 360-degree wave of pure, holy annihilation. Excalibur Morgan. A tide of golden and black energy that was the corrupted version of her noble phantasm, born not of malice, but of a righteous fury so profound it mirrored its opposite. It was a desperate, self-destructive move, unleashing all her remaining power in one devastating, uncontrolled blast. The wave of destruction tore through the forest. The 5 pulsating trees of Tiamat were instantly vaporized. The clock tower enforcers, their shields and wards useless against this raw, absolute power, were consumed, their screams silenced in a nanosecond. Kalen, caught at the edge of the blast, was hurled back like a ragdoll, his body broken and smoking, saved only by a dozen layered defensive artifacts that shattered in the process. The wave crashed against Narum's cage. The divine binders, overloaded by a power that was both holy and corrupted, both divine and draconic, screeched and shattered into a million pieces. Narum was free, but the blast washed over him. It should have killed him. But at its heart, it was still Artoria's power. It recognized him. It flowed around him, a storm of fury that refused to harm the one it was trying to protect. The light faded. The forest was gone. A massive, circular crater of smoking, glassy earth was all that remained. In the center of it, Narum was on his knees, the broken shaft of the Blah CK's spear still protruding from his shoulder. And a few feet away stood Artoria. Her armor was cracked and smoking, pieces of it falling away. The light of Excalibur was gone, the blade now just a simple, beautiful sword. Her energy reserves were utterly depleted. She swayed on her feet, her breathing shallow and ragged. But her eyes, blazing with fury, were fixed on him. She had just annihilated an elite clock tower squad and a major enemy nexus in one move. But the cost had been everything she had. She took a staggering step towards him, then another. The fury in her eyes was replaced by a desperate concern. She collapsed to her knees in front of him, her hands hovering over the terrible wound in his shoulder, afraid to touch him. "Naram," she whispered, her voice trembling. He looked up at her, his vision swimming. He saw her, not as the king of knights, but as Artoria. Battered, exhausted, and terrified. She had just unleashed a world-breaking power, not to win a battle, but to save him. The roles were reversed. She was no longer the sword he protected. She was his shield. He managed a weak, bloody grin. "Nice blast," he rasped, before the pain and the poison in his veins finally overwhelmed him. And his world faded once more to black. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The weight of the crown. The world returned to Naram in fragments. The smell of antiseptic herbs and damp earth. The rough texture of a wool blanket. The distant, mournful cry of a seabird. He was adrift in a sea of pain, a deep, gnawing agony that pulsed from his shoulder and spread a chilling numbness through his entire body. The divine binder's poison was a relentless anchor, dragging him down, severing him from the vibrant sea of life force he had always taken for granted. When he finally forced his eyes open, the light was soft and gray. He was not in the smoking crater of the Black Forest. He was in a cave, the rhythmic crash of waves echoing from its mouth. A small, smokeless fire cast a warm, orange glow on the damp stone walls. He was lying on a makeshift bed of furs and cloaks, his torso bare and bandaged. The broken shaft of Kalen's spear was gone, but the wound beneath the wrappings throbbed with a malevolent cold. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness and a sharp, stabbing pain in his shoulder forced him back down with a groan. "Don't move, you fool." The voice was quiet, weary, but firm. Artoria sat on a stone ledge near the fire, her back to him. She was no longer in her battered armor. She wore a simple, dark tunic and trousers, salvaged from Naram's own supplies in the craft. Her blonde hair was undone, cascading over her shoulders in a way he'd never seen before. She was sharpening Excalibur with a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape of stone on holy steel a strangely calming sound in the quiet cave. "Where?" he rasped, his throat dry. "The coast of Normandy," she answered without turning. "Iskander found us. He and the Boreans held off the rest of the Lamu while I got you out. The craft is hidden in a cove a mile from here. We are safe, for now." Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a soldier giving a report. But Naram, even with his senses crippled, could feel the turmoil beneath the surface. He could feel the exhaustion radiating from her, the profound depletion of her spirit after unleashing that cataclysmic blast. And he could feel something else, a deep, simmering guilt. He pushed himself up, ignoring the screaming protest of his body, and managed to lean against the cave wall. He looked down at his shoulder. The bandages were clean, expertly applied. But it was what he didn't feel that terrified him. He reached out with his senses, searching for his connection to the gate of Babylon, for the comforting presence of Karama's echo. For the hum of natural energy. There was nothing, only a void. The divine binder hadn't just been a weapon. It was a key, designed to turn a specific lock. It had turned off his divinity. The gate, his birthright, was gone. The vast wellspring of life force from his past life was walled off, a silent sea he could no longer access. All he had left was his own physical body and a small, flickering ember of his original Uzumaki chakra, not even enough for a single shadow clone. He was, for the first time in either of his lives, truly and utterly vulnerable. The realization hit him like a physical blow, a panic colder and sharper than any blade. He was a warrior without his weapons, a god without his power. How could he protect anyone? How could he face Tiamat? How could he fulfill his promise? The sheer, crushing weight of his failure settled upon him. He had been so confident, so sure of his plan, and his arrogance had led them straight into a trap, getting himself crippled. And forcing Artoria to burn herself out to save him. "This is my fault," he said, the words heavy with self-loathing. Artoria stopped sharpening her sword. The scraping sound ceased, leaving only the sound of the waves. She still didn't turn. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but unsparing. "It is." The blunt agreement was more painful than any accusation. "You were overconfident," she continued, her voice still flat. "You underestimated the clock tower. You saw them as politicians and schemers, and you failed to account for their true nature. They are academics, Narum. And an academic, when faced with an unknown, will first seek to dissect it. You walked into their laboratory, and they put you under a microscope. She finally turned, and her emerald eyes were filled not with anger, but with a deep, profound sorrow. And I let you. I believed in your plan so completely that I ignored my own instincts. I saw the trap, but I trusted you to see it as well. We both failed. She put the whetstone down and walked over to him. Kneeling by his bedside, she reached out and gently touched the bandage on his shoulder. Her fingers were cool against his skin. The wound is not healing, she said, her voice losing its clinical edge and becoming something softer, more pained. I have poured what little mana I have left into it, but the curse within the metal, it resists. It is actively devouring your life force. He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The shame was a physical weight. I'm useless like this. Do not say that, she whispered, her voice fierce. It's true, he snapped, the frustration and fear boiling over. My gate is gone. My chakra is a puddle. I can't even feel the world around me anymore. I'm just a man. A broken one. What good am I to anyone now? The great Narum, son of Gilgamesh, the hero who had stared down Enuma Elish, was reduced to this, a wounded, powerless man hiding in a cave. The weight of his own legend was crushing him. Artoria looked at him, at the despair in his eyes. A despair she recognized all too well. She saw the proud, confident warrior stripped of his power, and in his place, a lost, frightened man. And in that moment, she did not see a demigod or a prince. She saw someone who needed her. She sat on the edge of the furs, her posture losing its regal stiffness. She looked at her own hands, at the faint calluses that even a servant's magical body could not completely erase. When I drew Caliburn from the stone, she began, her voice a low, introspective murmur, I gave up my humanity. I ceased to be Artoria, the girl, and became Arthur, the king. A king, I was taught, must be more than human. An unwavering, flawless ideal. A symbol of perfection for the people to look up to. Her gaze drifted to the fire, but she was seeing a different time, a different place. I tried so hard to be that symbol. I suppressed all emotion, all doubt, all fear. I made every decision based on cold, hard logic for the good of the kingdom. I won every battle. I was the perfect king. A bitter, self-deprecating smile touched her lips. And in doing so, I doomed my country. My knights, who loved me, could not understand me. My people, who revered me, could not connect with me. I was a beautiful, flawless statue in a garden, and I never noticed the rot spreading in the soil beneath. By trying to be more than human, I failed to understand the very humans I was trying to lead. She finally looked at him, her eyes shining with a profound, ancient sadness. My greatest failure, the Battle of Camlin Hill, it was not a failure of arms, or of strategy. It was a failure of heart. I had sacrificed my own humanity for the sake of the crown, and in the end, I had nothing left to offer but a sword. A king cannot save her people with a sword alone. She reached out, her hand gently covering his. You have lost your divinity, Narum. You have lost the power of a god. But you are not useless. Because you were never just a god. Her words cut through his despair. He looked at her, truly seeing the story she was telling, the burden she had carried for 1500 years. That part of you that fought my father, she continued, her voice gaining strength. The part that refused to be erased, the part that stood up for a principle, that was not your gate of Babylon. That was not the echo of the beast within you. That was you, the man, the part of you that never gives up, the part that connects with people, the part that builds a team not of subjects, but of friends. Her grip on his hand tightened. That part is the strongest thing I have ever seen. He stared at her, speechless. She was not just comforting him. She was showing him a mirror. A mirror that reflected not the golden prince, but the stubborn, orange-clad ninja who had once sworn to never go back on his word. The boy who had won the hearts of his village not with godly power, but with grit, determination, and an unbreakable will. That was his foundation, not his father's blood, not the fox's power. It was the soul of Naruto Uzumaki. A slow breath escaped his lips, and with it, a mountain of pressure he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The pressure to be his father's son. The pressure to be a living legend. The pressure to be a god. All of it fell away, leaving only the simple, profound truth of who he was. I was so focused on the power I lost, he whispered. I forgot the power I've always had. A genuine smile, the first one in days, touched his lips. It was weak, tired, but it was real. Thank you, Artoria. She simply nodded, her own small smile a quiet answer. In that shared moment of vulnerability, the last walls between them crumbled. They were not a demigod and a servant, a prince and a knight. They were Narum and Artoria, two wounded soldiers, finding strength in each other's broken pieces. An unspoken, profound love, born not of romance but of shared struggle and mutual salvation, solidified between them. A new resolve hardened in Narum's eyes. He wasn't helpless. He was just fighting a different kind of battle. The poison, he said, his voice stronger now, analytical. It's attacking my spiritual core, my chakra network, but it's a foreign energy. If I can't overpower it, maybe I can retrain myself around it. He closed his eyes, not reaching for his lost power, but focusing inward on what remained. That tiny ember of Uzumaki chakra. It was weak, flickering, but it was his. He began to gently circulate it, not forcing it, but guiding it through his damaged pathways. It was agonizing, like forcing water through a pipe filled with hardening cement. But he pushed on, his jaw clenched, sweat beading on his forehead. He remembered Jiraiya's old lessons, so long ago. The basics, the foundation of everything, control, precision, feeling the flow. And then, he tried something else. He didn't try to access natural energy. He just listened to it. He let the feeling of the waves, the damp air, the solid earth beneath him, flow into him. He didn't try to draw it in or shape it. He just felt it, becoming a part of the world's rhythm. Slowly, painstakingly, a change began. He was mastering his GE mode from a completely different direction. Not as a source of power to be wielded, but as a state of being to be entered. A state of perfect harmony with the world. He was learning to feel the world not as something to use, but as something to be protected. For days, this was his new training. The agony was immense, but with every agonizing cycle, his control grew. The ember of his chakra began to glow a little brighter. He found he could stand, could walk. He was still weak, still powerless in the grand sense, but he was no longer helpless. He was reforging himself, not as a god, but as a sage. During this time, Iskander and the Boreans became their lifeline. The king of conquerors, his boisterousness tempered by the gravity of the situation, would perform scouting runs, his reports painting a grim picture. The destruction of the Schwarzwald Nexus had been a Pyrrhic victory. Tiamat, enraged, was accelerating her efforts. New, smaller nests were springing up like mushrooms after a rain. And the clock tower, having tasted blood, was on the hunt. Lord El Meloy II, Iskander's former master, sent a single, heavily encrypted message. Valerius has declared US-class threats to the human order. He is now the de facto leader of the association's wartime efforts. He's been hailed as a hero for engaging Tiamat's forces. He is building something, a weapon called the God Slayer Lance. Be careful. Valerius had spun their ambush into a political victory. He was consolidating his power, using the fear of Tiamat and the threat of Narum to seize control. The noose was tightening. One evening, Artoria returned from a perimeter check to find Narum standing at the mouth of the cave, staring out at the sunset. He was standing on his own, his posture steady. The pain is manageable, he said, anticipating her question. The poison is still there. A permanent part of me, I think. But I can work around it. My control is getting better. She stood beside him, and for a long moment, they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the clouds in hues of orange and purple. I am sorry, Narum, she said softly. He looked at her, confused. For what? You saved my life. For the blast, she clarified. Her gaze fixed on the sea. That power, Excalibur Morgan, it is the darker aspect of my legend. The form I take is a tyrant, a king who has fallen to darkness. To use it, it is a great stain on my honor. You used it to protect someone you care about, he said simply. There is no honor greater than that. It wasn't an act of tyranny. It was an act of love. The word hung in the air between them, simple, honest, and undeniable. She finally looked at him, and the last of her royal mask fell away, revealing the woman beneath. A woman who was tired of being a legend, who was tired of being alone. I do not know how to live for myself, Narum, she confessed, the admission a quiet agony. My entire life, my entire existence as a servant, has been for the sake of my country, for the sake of my duty. I do not know what comes after. He reached out and gently took her hand. His was warm, calloused, hers was cool and strong. Then live for me, he said, his voice soft but his gaze unwavering. And I'll live for you. We'll figure out the rest together. It was not a grand declaration of romance. It was a simple promise. A partnership. A quiet, profound vow made in the twilight. In a lonely cave by the sea. She squeezed his hand, her answer unspoken but absolute. They were no longer just allies. They were each other's reason to fight. He looked down at the dark iron key Gilgamesh had given him, which he had kept tied on a leather cord around his neck. He still didn't know what it was for. Prove it, his father had said. He looked at Artoria, at the end. EW found strength and quiet hope in her eyes. He felt the steady, if weak, pulse of his own chakra. He was wounded, weakened, hunted. The world was ending, but for the first time, he felt truly, completely whole. He was Naruto Uzumaki and Narum of Uruk, the sage and the prince. And he was not alone. The weight of the crown was still there. But now, it was a weight they would bear together. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The chalice of stars. The relative peace of the Normandy coast was shattered by a tremor that was not of the earth. It was a shudder in the fabric of reality, a deep, groaning sickness that pulsed across the globe. Narum felt it in his bones, a sympathetic vibration that resonated with the divine poison still knitting his shoulder together. Artoria stumbled, her hand flying to her chest as if her spiritual core had been struck. In the hidden cove, Iskander's chariot flickered like a dying candle flame, and the Boreans cried out as a wave of foul, warm energy washed over their cold forms. From her frozen valley, Lyra's voice crackled through the communication crystal, laced with static and panic. She is ascending. The sea of life, it is boiling. She is making her final push to manifest a complete physical body. Narum and Artoria rushed to the mouth of the cave. The sky, once a brilliant blue, was being veiled by a creeping, sickly purple haze that spread from the east. The sun itself seemed to be dimming, its light struggling to pierce the growing miasma. Tiamat was no longer just poisoning the world. She was suffocating it. All our skirmishes, all our victories, they were just distractions. Artoria said, her voice grim, her hand gripping the hilt of Excalibur. She was gathering power for this one, final moment. She's forcing our hand, Narum said, his mind racing. He was still weak. His control over his sage mode was better, more refined, but his raw power was a shadow of its former self. He couldn't face her head on. Not anymore. A direct confrontation was suicide. Then we must give her a battle she does not expect. Iskander's voice boomed as he, Kale, and Era joined them at the cave's entrance, their faces set with grim determination. Narum looked at his small, unlikely vanguard, a boisterous king of conquerors, 2 silent warriors of ice, and a peerless knight of the sword. And him, a broken demigod with nothing but his wits and a stubborn refusal to die. It wasn't enough. It couldn't be enough, but it had to be. He closed his eyes, sinking into the new, deeper state of sage mode he had cultivated. He didn't try to draw power from the world. He merged with it. He became the sigh of the wind, the crash of the waves, the solidity of the stone. His consciousness expanded, spreading across the globe, ignoring the chaos of the Lamu. Ignoring the frightened prayers of humanity, ignoring the thrumming hives of clock tower activity. He searched for one thing and one thing only. He had severed Tiamat's connection to Lancelot. He had felt the energy that bound him. It was a cord, a spiritual tether. If she had puppet strings, she must have a hand controlling them. Her physical form, the monstrous thing she was birthing, was a weapon. But the being wielding it, her true consciousness, had to be somewhere else. He dove deep into the conceptual realm, following the twisted, corrupted ley lines back to their source. He plunged his senses into the black, roiling heart of the sea of life off the coast of Japan. The sheer malevolence there was a physical force, a pressure that threatened to shatter his weakened spirit. It was a storm of grief, rage, and a terrible, sorrowful love for the children she sought to reclaim. And at the very bottom of that storm, in the deepest, most silent part of the abyss, he found it. A flicker of something different. Not rage, not corruption, just an immense, profound, and utterly overwhelming sadness. It was a tiny, sleeping ember in a hurricane of darkness. Tiamat's heart, her true, dreaming consciousness. He opened his eyes, a gasp escaping his lips. The world rushed back in, the sensory input almost overwhelming after the silent dark. I found her, he panted, his voice trembling with the magnitude of his discovery. Her real self. She's not in the monster she's creating. She's sleeping, dreaming, at the bottom of the sea of life. That's her weakness. Not the monster, but the dreamer. A desperate, insane plan began to form in his mind, a strategy born from the fusion of a shinobi's cunning and a savior's heart. We can't kill the monster. It's too strong, and its death might shatter the planet. He explained, his words coming in a rush. But maybe I don't have to kill her. Maybe I just have to wake her up. What are you suggesting? Artoria asked, her eyes wide. A feint, Naram said, his gaze sweeping over his allies. The biggest feint in history. Iskander, Kale, Aira, Artoria, you will lead the charge. You will attack her manifesting form with everything you have. You need to be loud. Be glorious, be so utterly distracting that the entire world, Tiamat included, is looking at you. And while we are this grand distraction? Iskander asked, a slow, excited grin spreading across his face. I'm going diving, Naram said, his expression deadly serious. I will go to the sea of life. Alone. I will dive to the bottom, find her sleeping heart, and I'm going to talk to her. It was the most ridiculous, Naruto-esque plan he had ever conceived. Talk no jutsu, on a primordial goddess of destruction. That is suicide, Kale stated, his voice flat but laced with alarm. The sea dissolves all life. You would be unmade before you got 100 feet. My life force is different, Naram countered, a flicker of an idea forming. The poison in my shoulder, it suppresses my divinity. Which means, right now, I'm more human than I've ever been. The sea of life is designed to dissolve divine spirits, magical energy, things that don't belong to the age of man. Maybe, just maybe, a stubborn, powerless human is the one thing it won't know how to deal with. It was a wild, desperate gamble, but it was the only card he had left to play. Artoria stared at him, her heart clenching with fear. He was asking them to be his shield, to face down a god, so he could perform a miracle. It was a plan built entirely on trust and a sliver of hope. We will give you the grandest stage in all of history, my boy. Iskander roared, slamming a fist into his palm. A battle poets will sing of for 1,000 years. Just be sure your act is worth the price of admission. I will freeze a path for our king's charge, Kale vowed, his hand gripping his ice staff. Artoria stepped forward, her gaze locking with Naram's. There were 1,000 things she wanted to say. Don't go. It's too dangerous. Let me go with you. But she knew none of them would sway him. And she knew this was the only way. Go, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Do what you must. We will hold the line. He gave her a quick, firm nod, a universe of unspoken feeling passing between them. Then, he turned and sprinted towards his hidden craft. He had a long way to fly. The final battle for the world began not with a clash of armies, but with a single, thunderous roar. Iskander, his red cape billowing, stood on the prow of a phantom ship, summoned from a fragment of his Yonioi Heteroi, sailing not on water, but on a frozen causeway created by Kale. They were charging across the Pacific Ocean towards a monstrous shape that was clawing its way out of the churning black water near Japan. It was Tiamat's new body. A horror of claws, horns, and shifting, muddy flesh that was miles high, its head lost in the purple clouds. Forward, Iskander bellowed, his voice a beacon of courage against the encroaching darkness. For the sake of the dream. For the conquest of tomorrow. Artoria stood beside him, Excalibur blazing like a fallen star. Kale and Aira stood at the stern, their combined power maintaining the impossible ice bridge and warding its flanks with raging blizzards. They were 4 figures against a god, a single point of light against an endless night. The world watched. Satellites, news helicopters, and the scrying spells of every magus on the planet were fixed on this impossible battle. They were the glorious, magnificent feint. And thousands of miles away, Narum, cloaked and unnoticed, brought his craft to a halt above the horrifyingly calm, black epicenter of the original Sea of Life. This was it. He took a deep breath. He looked down at the dark iron key Gilgamesh had given him. Prove it. What had his father meant? Prove his way was better. Prove he could win without destroying. He didn't know. The key was a mystery, humming with a quiet power he couldn't decipher. He didn't have time for riddles. He tucked it back into his tunic and stepped out of the craft, hovering above the black, liquid surface. He could feel the faint battle raging, a distant earthquake of power. He could feel the life force of his friends burning brightly, defiantly. They were buying him time. He couldn't waste it. He closed his eyes, let go of the chakra keeping him afloat, and fell. He hit the surface of the Sea of Life. It was not a splash. It was an immersion into absolute cold and silence. The substance was thick, viscous, and it did not feel wet. It felt like sinking into a void. Instantly, the sea went to work. It latched onto the lingering traces of his divinity, the memory of his gate, and tried to dissolve it. It found the divine binder poison and recoiled. A strange interaction of two opposing forces. It found his chakra network and tried to unmake it. The pain was unimaginable. It was the feeling of being erased, flayed on a conceptual level. He screamed, but no sound escaped in the thick, black liquid. He was dissolving. His gamble had failed, but as his consciousness began to fray, as his very being was being stripped away layer by layer, the sea encountered something it couldn't understand. Beneath the demigod, beneath the Jinchuriki's echo, beneath the sage, it found the core. The stubborn, unyielding, knuckle-headed soul of Naruto Uzumaki. A soul that was not divine, not demonic, not magical. A soul that had been forged in loneliness and hardship, tempered by friendship and love, and polished by an unbreakable promise. It was 100% pure, unadulterated human will. The Sea of Life, designed to reclaim the creations that had strayed from it, gods, monsters, divine constructs, had no protocol for something so fundamentally, so stubbornly, human. The process of dissolution slowed, struggling against this incomprehensible core of resistance. It bought him time. He fought against the pain, against the urge to dissolve, and forced himself to sink deeper. Following the thread of sadness he had sensed. Just as his consciousness was about to give out, a new power flared to life. Not from him. From the sky above, a golden light pierced the black sea, a column of impossible brilliance. Narum looked up through the murk and saw a sight that stole his breath. The sky above the Sea of Life was filled, from horizon to horizon, with the shimmering golden portals of the Gate of Babylon. But it was not Narum's gate. It was his father's, and Gilgamesh was not there. The King of Heroes, from his throne in Uruk, had opened his treasury to its absolute limit. But he wasn't firing his weapons. He was holding them. The combined conceptual weight of every treasure, every noble phantasm in his arsenal, was being exerted at once, not as an attack, but as a pressure. He was pushing down on the Sea of Life, holding back the tide of its corrupting influence, creating a pocket of relative calm, a path for his son. It was a silent, stunning admission. A final, unspoken acknowledgement from the King of Heroes. Your way is foolish, but I will not let you fail. The pressure on Narum eased. The dissolution slowed to a crawl. Buoyed by his father's impossible act, he sank the final few hundred feet. He landed on a soft, unseen floor. The blackness receded, and he found himself in a vast, silent, empty space. In the center, curled up like a child, was a colossal feminine figure made of starlight and nebula. She was beautiful, sad, and sleeping. Tiamat. She was not the monster. She was its source. A mother weeping in her sleep for the children who had left her, grown independent, and forgotten her. Her rage was the rage of a mother abandoned. Her desire to reclaim them was a twisted, sorrowful act of love. Narum walked towards her. He didn't feel fear, only a profound, shared sorrow. He knew what it was like to be alone. He reached her side and placed a hand on her vast, star-dusted shoulder. He didn't try to use a jutsu. He didn't try to attack. He just connected. He poured his own soul, his own memories, into her. He showed her the ramen shop, the laughter of his friends, the sting of failure, the joy of victory. He showed her the sun on the Irish coast, the pride in Iskander's laugh, the quiet strength in Artoria's hand. He showed her the beauty, the pain, the struggle, and the incredible, stubborn resilience of the humanity she had birthed. He didn't offer her judgment or destruction. He offered her understanding. I see you. I see your pain. But your children have grown. You have to let them go. Let them live their own lives. Make their own mistakes. Find their own happiness. He made her a promise. Sleep. Dream of them. And I will protect them in your stead. I will protect this beautiful, sad, wonderful world you made. I promise. A single, crystalline tear, the size of a boulder, slid from her closed eye. A wave of pure, unadulterated peace washed over him. A feeling of acceptance. The world above them erupted. Artoria, battered and bleeding, stood alone on the frozen causeway. Kale and Aira were down, their energy exhausted. Iskander's chariot had been destroyed, and he was fighting on foot. A small bronze figure against a tide of Lamu. Tiamat's monstrous form was about to overwhelm them. But Artoria did not retreat. Her gaze was fixed on a new arrival. Lord Valerius Bart. Homoloi stood on a floating platform of his own, Kalen at his side, now healed and encased in a powerful suit of combat armor. And in Valerius's hands was a spear of shimmering, silver light that seemed to drink the very air around it. The God Slayer Lance, a weapon forged from clock tower science, divine materials, and forbidden sorcery, designed for one purpose: to erase any being with a divine nature from existence. It is over, King of Knights, Valerius declared, his voice amplified by Magecraft. Your pathetic godling has failed. Tiamat will be dealt with by my hand. I will be the savior of the human order. And you will be the final piece of refuse to be swept away. He wasn't aiming at Tiamat. He was aiming at her. Artoria raised Excalibur, ready to meet her end with defiance. She dueled them, not one, but both. Valerius, a master magus of terrifying skill, assailed her with spells that bent space and time. Kalen, a brutal and efficient warrior, pressed her with relentless physical attacks. She was a cornered lioness, her golden mana a flickering candle in a hurricane, but she did not yield. She blocked a strike from Kalen, parried a curse from Valerius, her mind and body screaming with exhaustion. She was buying time. She didn't know for what. She just knew she had to. Kalen broke through her guard, his armored fist slamming into her side, sending her stumbling back. Valerius saw his opening. He leveled the God Slayer lance, its tip glowing with the light of a dying star. Goodbye, legend, he sneered. At that exact moment, a change swept across the world. The purple haze in the sky vanished. The monstrous form of Tiamat froze, then began to dissolve, not in an explosion, but like sugar in water, its mud and flesh turning to harmless seawater. The endless horde of Lamu shrieked, clutched their heads, and then crumbled into fine, gray dust. The sea of life turned from black to a brilliant, clear blue. Tiamat had accepted Naram's promise. She had returned to her slumber. Valerius faltered, his killing blow arrested by sheer shock. His target, his grand enemy, the justification for his power grab, was gone. His God Slayer lance, deprived of a world end, divine threat to channel its power against, began to overload, sputtering violently. Artoria saw her own opening. With the last dregs of her strength, she surged forward. She didn't aim for Valerius. She lunged at Kalen, the more immediate physical threat. Her blade, a blur of silver and gold, met his defenses. She fought with a desperate, brilliant clarity, her skill honed over 1,000 battles shining through. She disarmed him, her blade's pommel striking his temple with a sharp crack, sending him down into unconsciousness. Valerius, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, tried to retarget the destabilizing lance at her. But the weapon was out of control. It shattered in his hands in an explosion of silver light, the feedback blasting him from his platform and leaving him a broken, powerless heap on the ice below. The world was silent. The war was over. Artoria stood tall for a moment, the victor. Then, her strength gave out. The power holding her in the world, the contract with Elia to face a beast, was fulfilled. Her body began to flicker, to turn translucent. She was fading. She smiled, a sad, peaceful smile. It was over. Her duty was done. She could finally rest. Oh no, you don't. A voice, weak but resolute, came from behind her. Naram stood there, dripping wet, leaning heavily on Iskander, who had appeared at his side, but he was alive. He was smiling. He saw her fading, saw the peaceful acceptance in her eyes, and his heart broke. He wouldn't lose her. Not now. Not after everything. He ripped the iron key from his neck. He finally understood. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a key to a vault. It was a key to a single, unique treasure his father had deemed too sentimental, too foolish, to ever use himself. A prototype from the age of gods. Naram held the key aloft, and a single, beautiful golden chalice materialized in his hand from a final, sputtering portal. The chalice of Uruk, not a corrupted grail that granted twisted wishes, but a true wish-granting device. Capable of performing one single, perfect miracle. He stumbled towards her, holding it out. "I am not losing you," he said, his voice raw with emotion. She looked at the chalice, then at him. Her translucent eyes wide with disbelief. "Naram, my time is over. This is the way of things. Screw the way of things," he yelled, his voice cracking. "We make our own way. I promised you we'd figure it out together." He pushed the chalice against her chest. "I wish," he said, pouring all his will, all his love, all his hope into the words, "for her to have a life. A real, human life. Here, with me." The chalice flared with a light so warm and gentle it felt like the first dawn. The light flowed into Artoria, not with force, but with a tender embrace. Her flickering form solidified. The ethereal glow of a servant faded, replaced by the warm, living flush of a human being. The immense, burdensome power of a heroic spirit receded, leaving behind the finite, precious soul of a woman. She could feel a heartbeat. Her own. She gasped, her hand flying to her chest, feeling the steady, rhythmic thumping for the first time. Tears streamed down her face. Tears of shock, of joy, of a future she never thought she would have. The chalice, its miracle spent, dissolved into dust. Naram, his final task complete, finally collapsed, his consciousness fading, a contented smile on his face. He fell into the waiting arms of the woman he had just pulled back from the throne of heroes. Chapter 9 End.